The man holds a go piece with disdain and questions if that was all his opponent had to offer. He then slams the piece hard onto the board, showing that he is confident in his game strategy. The opponent, wearing sunglasses, prepares to make his next move with complete seriousness. Another piece is placed on the board accurately and quickly to pressure the opponent. The man in glasses grows tense as he realizes his move completely challenges any conventional logic. The board is shaken violently with the pieces flying everywhere after an unexpected move. The opponent becomes furious at being confronted with a move that shouldn't even exist in that game. A young man smirks even though he is completely bruised, and in the middle of the chaos, several men run desperately upon realizing that everything went wrong from the very start of that confrontation. The story then flashes back 10 years into the past to show the origin of this entire turbulent journey. At that time, little one Do-yoon was only 9 years old and already carried a very serious look. He lived in one of the poorest and most precarious neighborhoods in the region, known as Guncheong. His younger sister, Won-A-yoon, who was only 8 years old, faced that harsh reality right by his side. Suddenly, an old soccer ball is kicked hard and crosses the sky of that neighborhood. The neighborhood boys play ball and shout, so that no one lets Do-yoon get the toy. They run desperately and ask to block the boy, even holding onto his clothes if necessary. Do-yoon charges forward with determination and speed, not caring about the other boys approaching. The goalkeeper gets startled by the force of the kick and dodges the ball, which hits the wall violently. One of the boys gets outraged and shouts, asking what kind of goalkeeper runs away from the ball like that. The worn-out ball keeps rolling along the dirt ground after the protagonist's violent kick. Do-yoon watches everything in silence, aware that they live at the absolute bottom of that society. He knows very well that he is the most vulnerable person in a world completely dominated by hostility. The rival boy decides to stop the game, saying that's enough, and that his parents should be showing up soon. Do-yoon walks away, saying he has already played with them, and asks them not to bother him in his territory anymore. A boot steps firmly on the ball, interrupting the young man's path with a lot of authority. The mysterious man named Kim Moo-won smiles, observing that the boy does not act like an ordinary child. Moo-won kicks the ball back and tells the boy to stop complaining and to follow him while he is being nice. The ball lands near Do-yoon's feet, and the man reinforces that provocation was already enough. The boy looks back with suspicion and says he cannot afford to owe any favors. The man finds it funny and comments that he really has a talent for saying exactly what he doesn't want to hear. Despite being reluctant and breaking into a slight cold sweat, the young protagonist begins to follow the man through the streets. Do-yoon breaks the silence and asks directly where exactly they are going. Moo-won answers that they are going to his warehouse, but his little sister corrects him, saying it's just a house. The young man questions what kind of residence that would be, and the man just smiles, saying it's an empty place. It becomes clear that Moo-won is a completely different person who doesn't seem to belong in that miserable place. Upon entering the place, which is quite messy, the man tells the children to sit down in any corner. He comments that bringing the two of them opened up his appetite, but Do-yoon insists that he just wants to start working. Moo-won rips open a pack of instant noodles with his teeth and warns that the food is actually just for himself. He throws the packets on the table and says the boy's job begins by tidying up the clothes scattered across the floor. The young man keeps staring at the man without saying a single word, while his sister watches everything closely. The man notices his gaze and comments that this time there are even more things to clean up than before. He gives in and says he will pay a little more, jokingly complaining that the boy is very demanding. The sister tries to help pick up the items, but Do-yoon asks her not to touch anything because that is his job. With his arms full of clothes, the boy asks the man if cleaning up that mess is all he needs to do. Moo-won shakes his head while carrying a hot pot and calls the two siblings to eat with him. He serves the hot food on the improvised table and tells them to consider that meal as part of the job. The man sits down and explains with a calm look that meals were not meant to be eaten in loneliness. Do-yoon accepts the food but warns that he can deduct the cost of the dish directly from his daily pay. Moo-won places his hand on the boy's head impressed by the fact that he truly never accepts anything for free. While checking his cell phone, the man warns the young man to take great care and check his route well when leaving. Do-yoon accepts that this is just a temporary job, but deep down, he still feels quite uneasy. Moo-won observes the boy's effort and advises him not to push himself too hard, even if it is just practice. The two end up eating together, and the older man lets out a sigh, finding humor in the boy's stubbornness. He keeps watching Do-yoon eat in a hurry and wonders what kind of person he will become in the future. Their routine goes on strongly under the mentorship of Chudong-san, Moo-won's right-hand man and a retired MMA fighter. Do-yoon begins training hard, dodging Dong-san's fast strikes at the Granilpa group's gym. The boy prepares to counterattack with an intense and focused glow in his eyes, demonstrating his internal strength. Dong-san realizes that this boy carries a fighting spirit that is different from that of any other child. With speed, Do-yoon delivers a straight punch, concentrating all his energy into that attacking movement. The experienced fighter blocks the strike with the pad, impressed by the force of the boy's impact. Dong-san gives a satisfied smile upon realizing the immense potential the young man has for fighting. He hands Eds to the boy to nourish himself after the exhausting workout, ensuring he stays strong. Do-yoon looks at his own calloused hands, feeling the physical effects of all that daily dedication. The young man does push-ups outside under Dong-san's watchful eye, while his little sister watches in the background. He grits his teeth in exhaustion, but keeps forcing himself to the limit to become increasingly resilient. Dong-san smiles upon seeing the unwavering determination of that child who never gives up on his goals. Besides training, Do-yoon works hard delivering newspapers through the neighborhood streets to help with expenses. He also pushes himself in his studies, while Moo-won rests peacefully on the sofa in that messy living room. The boy saves every single coin he manages to collect, keeping it all inside an improvised plastic bottle. The bottle filled with coins and a few bills represents all his effort to manage to survive. Years pass, and Do-yoon now wears a high school uniform, showing that life kept moving along its difficult path. He reveals that it was by living that way that he truly learned what it means to endure suffering. The young man walks through the school courtyard, pretending not to hear the murmurs and gossip of the other students. He reflects that if his parents were alive, he would never have to carry such a heavy burden so early. Letting out a long sigh of exhaustion, the young man enters the sports locker room to prepare for practice. On the soccer field, Do-yoon runs with great agility, easily standing out among the other players. He was finally starting to feel something resembling hope, while playing with so much dedication. The coach interrupts the practice and calls him aside, on the exact day that the worst was about to happen. Do-yoon stops immediately in the middle of the field and looks back, knowing that something bad awaited him. The coach questions why his performance has supposedly been so poor and heavy lately. He coldly warns that he heard the boy will be left out of the team's next important match. Do-yoon just confirms with a serious and resigned look, showing that he already expected that decision. The young man accepts the unfair excuse, saying in an ironic tone that his body really does feel very heavy. In reality, Do-yoon knows very well that the problem isn't his body, but rather the bribe filling the coach's pockets. He heads toward the school storage room, believing that staying away from all that phoniness is better. He used to believe that sports were fair, but he realized that even there, things worked the exact same way. The young man locks the storage room door, determined to walk away from school soccer without carrying any regrets. Suddenly, a red-haired bully approaches and taunts him loudly, callously calling him an orphan. The other guys around burst into laughter, cruelly mocking the fact that he has no father or mother. The taunting is led by Hwang Sung-hyuk, the arrogant son of a director from a large criminal organization. Sung-hyuk glares at him scoffingly, asking if he really thinks he is someone special among them. He keeps laughing and says Do-yoon isn't playing simply because he has no money or influential parents to back him up. Sung-hyuk points to the field, saying he is the only failure who didn't pay to guarantee his spot. Do-yoon maintains his calm in the face of the insults, and ironically thanks the rich kid for revealing that ugly truth. He snaps the padlock shut firmly, trying to completely ignore all that loud nonsense. Sung Hayek becomes visibly irritated by the young man's indifference upon seeing that his provocations didn't work. The young protagonist remains motionless with his back to the bully, keeping his expression entirely cold. The red-haired bully shoves Do-yoon's head against the metal locker in an aggressive and unexpected way. He shouts furiously, saying he finds that attitude of superiority from Do-yoon extremely annoying. Hayek keeps pressing him, claiming that he would never play there even if he had all the money in the world. Hayek says the orphan will never be anything in life and calls him a parasite who doesn't pay Daejeong's taxes. The bully keeps provoking the boy and jabs his index finger against his head with total contempt. He claims with malice that this arrogant attitude from the young man is the real reason he has no living parents. Do-yoon remains silent, and during the humiliation while Hayek mocks him, asking if he lost his tongue. The redhead loses his patience and kicks Do-yoon from behind, uttering insults at him in the school hallway. Feeling an uncontrollable rage, the protagonist questions in a dark tone if his opponent knew something. He glares at his rival, saying the real problem is thinking he's a big deal just because his dad is some random gangster. Do-yoon lands a violent headbutt right in the middle of Hayek's face, catching him completely by surprise. The bully's nose begins to pour intensely after the brutal impact, leaving him shocked and unable to react. Hayek falls to the ground, and Do-yoon approaches, telling him to keep acting so ignorant. With a frightening look, the young man says that way, he will feel much less guilty about what he does next. Do-yoon kicks the soccer ball hard toward the bully, who remains lying on the ground without any strength. The ball flies at high speed after the accurate and anger-filled kick from the young school player. He warns that both the bully and the group backing him from behind are nothing but worthless cowards. The ball hits the goal net with extreme violence, showing the power of the kick fired by the protagonist. The other boys watch the scene terrified, and in complete silence in the face of that unexpected reaction. The coach shouts desperately upon seeing the son of the Daejeong gang director defeated in such a humiliating way. Do warns Hayek that humiliation was just a warning, and that he should consider himself lucky. A few days after the incident, an emergency school meeting is called to judge the boy's case. The committee discusses the physical aggression committed by Do-yoon against his classmate during practice. The principal announces that the boy has been expelled from the Players' Association, and that the school has decided to ban him too. The young man calmly questions why only he is being punished if the others started the aggression first. He wonders if the unfair punishment happens because he has no parents' money or any kind of influence. Do-yoon accuses the board directly, stating that all of this happens because the aggressors have the Daejeong group. The counselor gulps hard and averts his gaze, knowing that the young man's accusation is the absolute truth. The protagonist gives a cynical smile and reflects that the school at least taught him something useful about how the world works. Do-yoon walks outside, determined to live according to his own rules without depending on anyone else. He reflects that for a long time, that entire city has been controlled and dominated by dangerous gangs. These criminal groups extorted money from local residents under the pretext of offering protection. This false peace imposed by the gangs acted like poison, causing wronged people like him to only increase. Walking alone under the sunset, the young man feels tears stream down his face in a moment of weakness. He wipes his face with his arm, trying to erase any sign of vulnerability to continue his path. Night begins to fall over the humble neighborhood, where the young man plans his next steps against the system. Do-yoon accepts that his current difficult situation, full of obstacles, was something he would need to face. He looks at the sky with determination, knowing he can no longer back down in front of his enemies. The young man understands that this entire social game was already completely rigged against him from the start. The young man arrives before a metal door and takes a deep breath before entering the place. He knows he needs to face everything from major mafias to the simplest thugs who control the corners. Do-yoon heads down the stairs, determined to destroy that entire corrupt empire to settle his old scores. He decides to use against them the same logic of power and hostility they used to destroy his school life. Upon entering, Moo-won greets him with surprise, commenting on how long it's been since they saw each other and the boy's different look. The henchman of the Gonilpa organization, watch the young man's sudden arrival with curiosity and attention. Without hesitating, Do-yoon throws his heavy backpack onto the room's floor, drawing the attention of everyone present. The young man opens the bag, revealing the bottles of coins, and says that amount is double what he owed the man. One looks intrigued and answers that he doesn't remember lending even a single coin to the young man. The young man explains that that money is an estimate of all the times the man gave him food and shelter. The gang boss refuses the money in annoyance and tells the boy to leave if that was the only reason he came back. Do-yoon clenches his fist tightly and insists that he accept it, as this is the final settlement of his past with the group. Won warns him seriously, saying the boy is mistaking his kindness and that he should listen to the advice. The young man maintains a firm gaze and says very calmly that he truly has an important proposal to make. Won fixes his serious and sharp gaze on the dark-haired young man to understand the reason for his return. Do-yoon makes a deep bow, asking the gangster to officially adopt him as his legitimate son. He promises that in exchange, he will give the man the single desire he always craved, but could never achieve alone. The men of Gonilpa watch in silence as the young man keeps his head bowed, awaiting their leader's response. The gang leader keeps his eyes narrowed, suspicious of the real intentions of such an obstinate young man. Won comments that he always wondered how the boy would grow up, but realizes only his body has changed. The gangster inquires provocatively if the young man really knows what he truly desires so much. Do-yoon answers immediately, revealing that the man's great desire is to bring down the leader of the rival gang, Garipa. He guarantees with an intense glow in his eyes that he will bring the rival leader the next time the two meet. The boy firmly states that he never breaks his promises, acting fairly exactly like the gangster himself. Won chuckles softly and points out that the young man suddenly appeared using formal terms and making absurd statements. He questions why the young man insists on coming there, even while knowing very well he would face a refusal. Do-yoon points to the ground, stating with conviction that he came because that destiny was already meant to happen. Won lets out a tired sigh and wonders why destiny had to choose him of all people for this task. The young man counters, asking if there is anyone else besides him who is strong enough to manage to handle him. Do-yoon adds that apart from Won, there is no one in the world capable of tearing down the massive Daejeong organization. Surprised by the young man's audacity, the gang leader questions what makes him believe in something so unbelievable. The protagonist smiles slightly, revealing that the answer is simple because he saw them fighting himself in the past. He recalls in detail the day he first arrived at the Regional Public Administration building. The memory shows Won and his strongest men gathered with serious expressions and determined to fight. Do-yoon recalls that at first, he thought he would see only 5 ordinary men talking in that dark hallway. In reality, he ended up witnessing 2 of those men take on an entire crowd of brutal criminals. A massive group of heavily armed henchmen had gathered there to corner the Gonilpa members. The fighters Dong, San, and Tae-ju charged at their opponents with powerful punches and improvised weapons. The enemies were beaten without any mercy in the middle of that heavy rain falling outside the location. Each punch delivered by the gangsters was accurate and brutal, knocking out the henchmen who dared cross their path. Even while surrounded, they dominated the combat, choking and bringing down opponents one by one with extreme ease. Dong San attacked with devastating strikes, using heavy tools to crush any enemy resistance. The intruders shouted in pure terror upon realizing they didn't stand the slightest chance against the group's overwhelming force. The young man recalls that Won and his henchmen didn't give the enemies an opportunity to flee from that onslaught. Peeking through a crack alongside his sister, Do-yoon engraved that violent scene into his mind to never forget it. The glow in his eyes that cold night was the awakening of his determination to survive in that cruel world. The silhouettes of the victorious gangsters remained marked forever as the ultimate symbol of power for the boy. Back in the present, Won rests his face on his hand thoughtfully and asks if that battle really happened like that. Loyal companions Bang, Tae-ju, and Chu-dong San listen to the conversation, maintaining an imposing and silent stance. Han Song Jae chimes in and reminds them that this occurred when Choi Dae-ap sent his men to give them a welcome. The gang leader feigns exhaustion, saying the explanations have already been enough and that the boy can leave now. Do-yoon turns to walk toward the exit and warns in a calm tone that he was merely leaving his message delivered. He opens the office door and coldly states that he is determined and that nothing else can stop him now. The young man slams the door hard, leaving behind a tense atmosphere filled with uncertainty among the mafiosos. Tae-ju breaks the silence and questions the boss about what he intends to do regarding the young man's proposal. The henchman warns that the young man is not trustworthy and that for a small and exiled organization, the danger is even greater. Moo-won smiles slightly while lying on the sofa and comments that it had been a very long time since his partner disagreed with him like that. He adds that it isn't just about them, because in reality, no criminal organization would be capable of taming the boy. The gangster closes his eyes laughing and thinks that that cheeky boy could have waited at least 2 more years. He recalls raising Do-yoon as if he were his own son but never expected him to return to ask for this. Moo-won remembers the boy's innocent voice in the past, saying he wanted to grow up to be exactly like him. Little Do-yoon ran happily, revealing his childhood dream of becoming strong and respected like the gangster. The man sighs on the sofa, knowing very well that the boy who just left there has indeed never been an ordinary person. Moo-won stands up slowly, repeating aloud the words of the young man who now wishes to become his adopted son. Moo-won opens an old cardboard box, commenting to himself that it had been quite a long time since he messed with it. Inside the box, memories of the past are kept, including a boy's school graduation photo. The gangster picks up a completely crumpled piece of paper that held important records of his turbulent journey. A violent accident involving a cargo truck is remembered, marking the beginning of the changes in Moo-won's life. Funeral portraits covered in flowers are displayed at a service marked by extreme sadness and grief. Do-yoon, wearing a black suit, stares into space while the corporation leaders discuss the constant failures of the division. An employee walks through the hallways of the Hooksung company, aware that obligations were neglected. The directors, with red and threatening glares, complain about the multi-billion loss caused to the other sectors. An official notice determines that Moo-won's new management position will be in a small and rundown office. Showing no regret, the gangster gathers his belongings and leaves the corporation's main building, accompanied by his most loyal men. Manager Moo-won walks toward his new workplace in the suburbs. The group's silhouettes appear in the dusty room of the new office that will control the entire Gunjang-dong region. Moo-won carries his cardboard box, wearing a sarcastic smirk as he prepares for the new challenges. The henchmen clean up the improvised location and carry a heavy sofa to start organizing the work environment. The manager enters his new apartment alone, holding the box containing his few mementos of the past. He observes the transfer document with disdain, feeling the weight of that humiliation imposed by his superiors. Overcome by a feeling of outrage, the man crushes the official paper tightly using only one of his hands. He sits alone on the sofa in the dark living room, staring at the crumpled paper on the floor amid a melancholy silence. The man's blue eyes glow intensely in the dark, demonstrating that he would never accept that situation quietly. Back in the present, Moo-won lets out a long sigh and places his hand over the same cardboard box from years ago. He confesses to himself that Do-yoon is a boy who manages to occupy his thoughts in many different ways. Suddenly, firm knocks on the door break the office silence, drawing the organization leader's attention. His partner Song-jae identifies himself from the other side, warning that it is him waiting outside to enter. He opens the door slowly and enters the room, with a calm expression to talk with the group's boss. The subordinate mentions that he bought some medicine, but notices the leader is already preparing to drink alone. He sits on the floor holding the liquor bottles and asks curiously, what exactly happened around here? Song-jae reports that the boy was expelled after getting involved in a violent fight with the children of rival gangsters. Moo-won hands a drink to his partner, agreeing that that outburst of fury from the boy was only a matter of time. The leader asks if the fight was to protect little A-yoon, demonstrating concern for their situation. The subordinate confirms that it was, adding that Do-yoon has always been a boy quite different from all the others. Song-jae questions the leader's next actions, since the young man has now become someone impossible to hide. He warns that if such a determined boy doesn't join their group, he will end up going to a much worse place. The partner suggests that it is much better for them to take the young man in before other criminals do something terrible to him. The gang boss takes a sip of his drink and questions if the other trusted members think the same way. He mentions that Dong Sound is insisting a lot on training the boy and turning him into a professional fighter soon. Song Jae doubts that Do Yoon would accept that role of a fighter, as he believes he doesn't have the mindset of a henchman. He believes the best option is for them to stay close to ensure the young man doesn't get lost in the criminal world. One jokes, saying his partner has always been too rational when analyzing the organization's problems. He expresses a desire to know what the boy thinks and how much he actually planned that decision to return. With a serious look, the leader asks who is responsible for watching the young protagonist's steps at the moment. The partner picks up his cell phone and asks if he should have Jin bring the boy back to the office right now. Nods and orders them to do it quickly before the young man decides to look for their rival, Choi Dae-up. The partner makes the phone call, which begins to ring, causing the line to vibrate across the other side of town. Do-jin answers the call from the office and confirms that he is stationed near the children's residence. The henchman advises the leader to go to the location personally after spotting Do Yoon walking alone on the dark street. The young protagonist walks under his HUD with a glowing look, charged with intense focus and determination. At a local bar, gangsters drink and ask the boss not to leave early from his promotion party to headquarters. The imposing rival leader praises the place and says his useless subordinates can keep drinking as much as they want without him. 3 henchmen talk on the street, commenting on the vastness of the Daejeong organization and the boss's strict orders. The leader guarantees that no one would dare attack him from behind in his own territory and tells the men to relax. Choi Dae-up leaves the bar complaining about the rigidity of headquarters, while a subordinate thanks him for the opportunity. He walks away muttering curses, knowing that leading the Gunripa gang in rundown Guncheong was terrible. The man walks alone through the night, complaining that he spent years in that forgotten place with no perspective. He deeply regrets having been demoted in the past to the worst neighborhood in that entire region. Dae-up feels hatred for having to walk the streets, pretending to be just an insignificant local bully. He rants with outrage about corporate lies and the promise that he would be transferred to headquarters. The gangster approaches a dark corner of the street to relieve himself amid his thoughts filled with bitterness. He curses angrily, wondering how much more garbage the corporation leaders are going to throw on his back. The man remembers that things were much better when the local police acted with more firmness. Dae-up fixes his clothes calmly, trying to push all the problems out of his mind. Tired of that routine, he gets startled upon hearing footsteps and grabs a cigarette from his pocket, asking sharply who is there. The subordinate appears and offers a light, saying the boss drank too much and that he prefers to smoke in his company. The boss accepts the lighter, calling him a kid, and proposes they have one more drink before heading out. Suddenly, a mysterious voice pronounces the gang leader's name, interrupting that friendly conversation. The 2 men look into the middle of the dark alley and spot young Do Yoon standing there, waiting for them. The young man begins to walk slowly toward them, while checking the time on his wristwatch. Do Yoon calls out for Choi Dae-up again, glaring at him with a very threatening look. The gang leader lights his cigarette with indifference and asks what the boy wants, dragging himself all the way there. The henchman standing beside him takes an aggressive stance and says he will take care of that annoying situation. Dae-up tells his subordinate to forget about it and decides to walk over to the young man personally to confront him. He stops before Do Yoon, taking a puff from his cigarette, and asks directly who he thinks he is. The experienced criminal analyzes the young man's size and scoffs, noticing that he is just a child. He complains that a brat shouldn't be out on the street at this hour, ruining the mood of a busy adult. The gangster threatens the young man sharply, telling him to vanish from there before the effect of the alcohol wears off for good. He warns that he never resolves things in a friendly manner once he gets his completely sober senses back. The men glare at each other in the middle of that dark and silent alley, creating an atmosphere of imminent combat. Noticing that the young man hasn't moved, The criminal asks with disdain if he really doesn't intend to leave. Do, Yoon answers coldly, saying he is only there because he needs to recover something that belongs to him. The young man glares at him intently and suggests the two talk directly to resolve that pending matter. The experienced criminal finds the request funny and repeats the word ironically, doubting that proposal. Yoon explains that he came looking for an important justification that can validate his next actions. He comments that gangsters nowadays don't fight without a reason because large corporations control everything closely. The young man asks mockingly since when criminals actually started caring about those rules. He adjusts his watch and reinforces that he came to that dark alley just to find this specific justification. The young man reveals that he worked 3 years in the rival gang's businesses and didn't even receive 20% of his pay. He explains that this financial default, based on real facts, is the perfect justification he needed. The leader laughs upon realizing it's about money and warns that that matter shouldn't be discussed with him. He says with disdain that the young man should collect that debt directly from his former employers. Dae-op tells the boy to stop thinking he's important over nonsense and orders him to vanish from there immediately. Yoon counters, asking if he really would have come all the way there if he wanted to resolve things that way. The gangster loses his temper, calling the young man crazy, and asks if he even understands the meaning of a justification. He makes a scoffing face, demonstrating impatience with the petulance of the young man who challenges him without fear. Dae-op shouts furiously, saying that a real justification demands the loss of dozens or even hundreds of lives. The man throws his lit cigarette to the ground violently, demonstrating that his patience has completely run out. He asks if the boy really thinks a gang war can be started over a few pennies. The Gunrupa leader warns aggressively that there is absolutely nothing in that alley that can help the young man. He points to the gang symbol on the wall, stating that the young man won't find support anywhere. The man says he only tolerated the petulance until now because Yoon was the only one who spoke to him without showing fear. The young man ignores the threat and comments mockingly that the gangster really talks too much when he's drunk. Yoon scratches his head and concludes that his personal situation alone won't be enough for what he plans. Yoon glares at the man and asks what he thinks about the matter regarding human trafficking of orphans in that neighborhood. The story flashes back to the past, showing the young man in a humble room reading while footsteps are heard outside. The boy hears strange noises coming from the hallway and goes on maximum alert, not knowing who is approaching. Outside, criminals complain that that neighborhood was terrible for hiding a kidnapped child. One of the kidnappers enters the dark room and asks, laughing, if they really secured fresh merchandise. The man celebrates the sale value, while the child huddled on the bed asks in fear who they are. The criminal grabs the boy's head and says he had bad luck crossing his path on that cold night. The other man orders not to hurt the child, but rather to gag his mouth and tie his wrists well. The subordinate agrees and prepares the duct tape, saying that isn't the first time they've done this job. At that moment, young Yoon enters the place, and the kidnappers realize he is no ordinary local resident. Without hesitating, the young man delivers a flying kick against one of the men, leaving them completely infuriated. The protagonist ends up being knocked down, and one of the criminals complains about how unpleasant that neighborhood was. He fixes his clothes in annoyance, muttering that nowadays even street kids don't know the rules anymore. The accomplice pulls the heavy suitcase, telling the boss they are going to make good cash and should leave quickly. They decide to flee in a hurry before being seen, leaving young Yoon lying injured on the damp floor. The lead kidnapper stops walking for a moment and looks back with a thoughtful and malicious expression. The subordinate points to the young man on the floor and asks the boss what they should do with that witness. The leader kicks the fallen young man without any mercy, answering that there is nothing to worry about. He smiles and says he doesn't intend to go so far as to have to get rid of a body at this moment. The boy remains passed out in the gutter, while the criminals walk away in the dark, taking the other victim. The criminals from Guncheong 2 used to kidnap the abandoned children from Guncheong 1 to sell them. Back in the present, Yoon says this revelation is justification enough for Gunilpa to act in the region. The rival gang leader looks completely shocked as he realizes the young man knows the whole truth about the crime. He tries to hide his surprise, commenting with cynicism that no one could prove that old accusation. The protagonist merely flashes a silent smirk, knowing his rival's fate is already sealed. Daop realizes that the situation has become serious and that there is no more room for talk or excuses in that alley. The man warns, with his eyes glowing, that he cannot let the young man leave there alive after everything. The criminal charges into the attack, delivering an extremely powerful and fast punch toward the protagonist. Yoon dodges the enemy punch with quick reflexes, initiating a frantic pursuit through the streets. With a gaze charged with hostility, the young man concentrates all his strength into a straight punch against his opponent. The blow hits Daop's abdomen dead, who is pushed back by the brutal violence of the impact. The gangster shouts in pain and fury upon feeling the damage caused by the accurate punch fired by the protagonist. Taking advantage of the opening, Do-yoon leaps into the air with his fist raised, ready to crush his rival without any hesitation. A devastating knee strike hits the gangster's chest, throwing him against the ground with extreme force. Daop widens his eyes incredulously, realizing he was completely dominated by the young man's implacable strength. The criminal leader lies defeated and stretched out on the pavement while Do-yoon watches him from above with total coldness. Do-yoon checks the time on his wristwatch and comments with contempt that his opponent talks too much. With his glowing eyes flashing intensely, he celebrates having managed to conclude that stage successfully. Daop manages to stand up with difficulty and wipes the fluid from his face, saying that now he understands the justification. The gangster assumes his combat stance, his glowing eyes revealing that the boy has sparked his interest. He charges forward, delivering a brutal punch that strikes the protagonist by surprise right in the middle of his face with a lot of violence. Do-yoon staggers to the side upon receiving the powerful blow, but stands firm to continue the life or death combat. The young man's HUD falls off, revealing his bruised face, and he coldly tells his rival not to prolong this fight. He adds with disdain that he highly doubts the two of them will have the opportunity to meet again in life. Do-yoon grabs his opponent's arm in mid-air, blocking the next punch and leaving Daop completely perplexed. The young man warns with a cold smile that the final hour has arrived, making the rival leader widen his eyes in terror. He grabs the gangster's hair, warning that the moment has come for the legendary hammerhead shark to lose for the second time. The criminal turns pale with fear upon hearing the word second coming directly from the mouth of that young monster. Do-yoon's fierce eyes glow in the dark as he prepares to deliver the final blow. He slams Daop's head against the pavement, decreeing that the Guncheong-1 region now belongs to him. The adversary warns that that neighborhood is going to vanish from the map and aggressively orders him to let go immediately. A loud snap echoes in the middle of the confrontation while an irritated voice reinforces that he had already warned about that before. The man advances, dragging his feet on the ground, and makes a direct threat case the rival decides to touch his son again. With a dark look and his eyes glowing, he warns that he is willing to tear out his enemy's eyes for real. The man repeats the threat with extreme fury and harsh words, making it clear that he is not playing around with that violent promise. On the phone, the leader is informed about a company celebration dinner and asks where exactly the meeting will be. The man confirms the indicated location near the road and ends the call, aware of the commitment ahead. He snaps his cell phone shut with considerable force, showing that the conversation had come to an end very quickly. Chudong-san, the boss's right-hand man, wonders if that young man named Do-yoon is finally going to show up. The alley prepares to accompany the leader to the exit, but is interrupted at that exact instant before taking his first steps. With his back turned to his ally, the boss orders firmly and authoritatively for him to remain in the office. The leader explains with disdain that it's just a simple situation in the 2nd district of Guncheong and goes on his way, demonstrating total respect. Dong-san makes a deep bow and sincerely wishes for his boss to return safely. The man's feet slide firmly over the damp street ground as the memory of that past combat returns. One walks imposingly through the night under the snow while recalling with disdain his former warning to the region's enemies. The criminal trembles in terror, recalling the frightening threat about having his eyes torn out if he dared touch the boy. The man remembers when he was questioned about why he chose that specific boy among so many others. At that moment, he couldn't find any logical answer to justify his action of taking the child in. Overcome by anger, the gangster shouts that he protects the boy simply because he considers him his own legitimate son. He reveals that the biggest reason for that choice was the sharp and frightening glare the young man carried in his eyes. Before the fallen henchman, the man reinforces with authority that dude Yoon is just a child and must be treated as such. With his hands in his pockets, the gang leader glares at his rival with superiority and tells him to snap into reality once and for all. The irritated criminal counters that his opponent keeps talking nonsense because there are no children in their line of business. Gritting his teeth with fury, Ma1 warns that his opponent is the one who needs to get his senses together before things get worse for him. The man grabs his rival's arm firmly and warns that whoever talks nonsense ends up being treated in the worst possible way. He quickly dodges a blow delivered by the criminal, who shouts furiously, calling him an idiot in the middle of the fight. With his guard up, the experienced fighter warns that this time he won't focus his attack on his adversary's eye region. He promises coldly that he will tear off his enemy's ear if he insists on continuing with that cheap provocation. The opponent charges forward with clenched teeth, demonstrating that he doesn't intend to back down in the face of any of those threats. The two exchange fast and violent attacks, creating an intense exchange of punches in the middle of that dark and silent alley. The henchman makes an expression of pure astonishment upon realizing that his opponent's reaction speed exceeds his expectations. A heavy body blow is delivered with maximum speed, hitting the target with great precision and overwhelming force. A brutal punch connects directly to the criminal's face, causing fluid to splash everywhere after the heavy impact. The adversary widens his eyes in complete shock upon feeling the power of the attack he just took dead on. Without giving his enemy time to breathe, the protagonist continues delivering a rapid sequence of punches at high speed. With his eyes glowing and a grim smile on his face, he demonstrates that he is enjoying that violent combat. The opponent tries to strike back with a heavy blow and complains that his rival ended up being demoted because of someone else's actions. The strikes collide with extreme violence, generating a large flash at the point of contact between the two fighters. The enemy grimaces with massive physical effort, trying in every way to endure the absurd pressure of that attack. The protagonist lowers his body with unbelievable agility and perfectly dodges the punch thrown at his head. He prepares an overwhelming counterattack, driving his clenched fist upward with extreme power toward his opponent's jaw. A direct punch hits the criminal's jaw dead on, who spits fluid from the brutal impact that throws him backward instantly. Despite staggering, the two warriors quickly compose themselves and assume their defensive stances without lowering their guard. They charge at each other again in a rapid burst, ready to decide the combat on that next move. The hero's punch crashes violently against his adversary's face, generating a heavy shockwave and dust in the alley. Yoon watches that entire violent scene with wide eyes and an expression of deep surprise. The defeated rival looks up with difficulty as he feels the weight of the crushing defeat he just suffered there. One glares at him with a terrifying glow in his eyes, showing that the fight was decided from the very start. One last quick and precise strike is delivered, cutting through the air to decree the definitive end of that street combat. The fighter plants his foot firmly on the ground to stabilize his body after executing that final move perfectly. The adversary dodges by leaping backward quickly to avoid being hit in the middle of that violent street fight. Out of breath and quite bruised, the man curses angrily upon realizing he completely underestimated his opponent's strength. The furious rival questions if he really doesn't know the true reasons that led to his demotion in the past. The gang leader remains standing in silence with a terrifying glow in his eyes that intimidates anyone nearby. With total coldness, he questions his opponent if the reason for so much idle talk is because he finally grew afraid to fight. Yoon, fallen on the pavement, shouts with fury against his adversary, showing he doesn't intend to surrender that easily. The rival grits his teeth with immense hatred and shouts that he waited 10 long years for this exact day to get his revenge. He advances at high speed, swearing that this time he will completely destroy his enemy without giving any chance for defense. The legendary hammerhead shark resurfaces with his entire murderous aura, showing that his strength and danger remain intact in the fight. The gangster readies his fists and glares at his adversary with extreme determination, ready to deliver his most powerful strike. The two clash violently, delivering brutal punches that cross paths and generate a massive flash in the middle of the street. The hero's eyes glow intensely in the darkness, revealing that he won't back down even a single millimeter until he finishes his rival. Young Do-yoon watches that entire insane demonstration of strength with wide eyes and in absolute shock. With his face completely bruised, the adversary tilts his head back as he is hit dead on by the devastating strike. The rival collapses violently onto the wet pavement, while the protagonist stands firm under the street lamppost. The victor takes a deep breath and observes his defeated opponent on the ground with the same calm and intimidating look as always. He bends down and grabs the enemy on the ground aggressively, while repeating that he had already warned him about the consequences. With great fury, he approaches the fallen rival's face and warns that this time he will indeed tear his ear off without mercy. The defeated man lets out a desperate cry of pure agony that echoes throughout the dark and silent alley during the attack. Fluid splashes violently in the darkness, confirming that the terrible punishment promised by the protagonist was executed. Do-yoon reflects in silence that even without knowing the full story, the final outcome of those fights is always exactly the same. He knows that even the dangerous enemy who used to maim adversaries ended up suffering the same terrible fate there. The rival ended up having his own ear torn off in the end, showing the poetic justice of that violent confrontation. The young man nods, aware that the blonde-haired man is someone who always does what needs to be done on the street. He spits fluid from his mouth and shows that besides keeping his promises, he makes sure no one ever forgets them. Sitting on the pavement, the protagonist understands that the final outcome of that battle was already drawn from the first instant. He knows that this relentless and fair attitude is the true way that defines the man's leadership in that criminal world. The boy extends his hand, knowing very well that this strong gangster is the only man worthy of reaching the top of that city. He thinks to himself that if he goes alongside that leader, his great life goals will finally become reality. The boss, with his mouth injured, asks with disdain what the young man is still doing without accepting his help to stand up. The two finally exchange a firm handshake, and the man questions why the young man keeps staring at him in such a serious manner. The dark-haired boy points coldly to the injury and warns that there is still some fluid trickling from his mouth. The man wipes his hand on his chin, asking if it stopped, and Do-yoon counters that obviously it's not fine because there's still fluid. The leader decides to leave, calling the boy to return with him, but the young man asks him to wait just one more moment. Growing impatient, the man warns that he is going ahead and tells the boy to find his own way back home alone. Crouched on the ground, young Do-yoon extends his arm to pick up something important that had been left lying in the darkness. The young man stares intently at the opponent's severed ear in his bruised hands, displaying a cold look without remorse. Back in the office in the present, the conversation continues about the young man having gone to collect that old debt with their rivals. The leader asks from the sofa if the young man actually did all that just to secure a justification that would start the attack. The boss gives a sarcastic chuckle and wonders aloud why children nowadays are so brave and cocky. He scratches his head in confusion, not knowing for sure if the young man is a clever genius or just an ignorant kid who loves looking for trouble. With a serious look, the boss concludes that no matter what happens, the correct decision on his part is to cut ties with him. The young man counters immediately, saying aloud for his leader not to waste time thinking too much about that situation. With a determined and focused look, the boy directly states that he merely fulfilled his old promise perfectly. The boss slightly agrees and comments on the rumors that their rival, Choi Dae-up, will finally return to the corporation's headquarters. He closes his eyes and advises the boy to give up that dangerous life soon and focus back on his studies at school. The man guarantees that in the first district of Guncheong, There must surely be at least one high school willing to accept him. With his eyes glowing, the young man refuses the suggestion immediately and questions why he would have to do something like that now. Yoon shoves his hand into his coat pocket and calmly notifies the organization leader that the payment is indeed right there. He opens his hand, revealing the rival's severed ear, and delivers the trophy, stating that that is the proof the man requested. The young man argues astutely that the ear is part of the head, and therefore his promise was technically fulfilled. Yoon raises his fist and proudly states that he now belongs to the Gonilpa group as Kim Moo-won's legitimate son. The organization leader lets out a tired sigh and lowers his head, unable to believe the audacity of that boy. He scratches his temple, visibly perplexed and stressed by the absurd situation the young man just created in that office. Facing the young man's silence, the man seriously asks what the real reason is for him insisting so much on that idea. The boss firmly questions why the young man wants so badly to become a gangster and especially why he wants to be his son. With a serious and decided stance, the protagonist calmly reveals that he carries only two major goals on his journey. The young man looks intently at the man and states that his first plan of action is to completely bring down those corrupt criminals. He guarantees with a dark glow in his eyes that he intends to drag all his enemies to a place much worse than his. The young man explains that it doesn't matter what path he needs to tread or the consequences he will have to face to win this war. Leaving the man completely shocked, Yoon states with determination that his second great desire is to put his father at the top. He gives a small smile and reinforces with conviction that this grand achievement of power will surely be his next goal. The strong ally Dong-san appears leaning against the office's metal door, watching the movement in absolute silence. Yoon peeks through the crack of his house door and gets a bit confused upon noticing the fighter's sudden presence. The warrior turns sideways calmly and merely nods, firmly ordering the boy to follow him. The two begin walking together through the neighborhood's silent and dark streets under the soft light coming from the night sky. The boy breaks the silence and asks if their destination on that dark night walk will once again be the Dam region. They finally arrive before a small local grocery store that is brightly lit in the middle of that empty residential street. With his tattooed arms, the warrior casually opens the wrapper of a blue popsicle to offer to the young protagonist. Yoon observes the sweet with suspicion and questions why he is being nice all of a sudden, and if this has to do with the gang. The man hands over the popsicle and calmly explains that that decision was actually already meant to happen from the start. The young man bites the ice and comments resignedly that no matter how much he tries to fight it, he will always end up returning to that place. Dong-san listens to the young man's rant and assumes a very serious and thoughtful expression about the future of that street child. The warrior firmly advises that if the young man doesn't have a truly massive reason, he should stay far away from the criminal world. Giving a friendly pat on the young man's back, the man recognizes that he indeed possesses a very special talent for fighting. Yoon gets startled by the compliment, while the man confesses that he himself ended up stepping away from that path over time. Eating his sweet, the experienced ally warns the young man to focus on his future and leave adult problems to the older ones. The dark-haired boy assumes a defensive stance and warns with total seriousness that he no longer intends to act that way. Yoon states with determination that if he doesn't decide to act personally right now, absolutely nothing will change in his reality. The fighter glares at him seriously and reminds him that he never taught him to fight, just so he could go out solving everything with brute force. The boy averts his gaze, looking a bit upset, and answers in a low tone that he knows his rules very well. Holding the sweet, he points out that the actions the boss and the other older members are planning are actually revenge. The boy takes another bite of the popsicle and states with conviction that for this reason, he needs to do the exact same thing. The imposing Dong-san remains silent with his back to the boy while processing all that determination coming from the child. Yoon points his thumb at himself and repeats in a firm and unwavering tone that his only current motivation is indeed revenge. The fighter warns that the higher orders to act have already been sent, and that from that moment on, there would be no turning back. Dong-san listens in silence to the striking revelation from the boy, who proudly states that he considers Kim Moo-wan his real father. Back in the present, the leader's hands crush the official report papers that were on top of that desk. He throws the completely crumpled paper directly into the office trash, demonstrating that he no longer cares about the rules. Someone knocks on the door, announcing they are coming in, and immediately asks if they're Ali Dong-san has already returned from his mission. Dong-san makes a respectful bow near the entrance, and the boss asks curiously if young Do-yoon has already left. Walking calmly through the room, the fighter confirms that he has and guarantees that the boy managed to return home safely. The organization leader rests his head on the sofa and murmurs reflectively about the turn things took with Do-yoon. Keeping his hands behind his back, his Ali Dong-san builds up courage and respectfully asks the boss what the reason was for acting like that. The man averts his gaze and confesses sincerely that even if the young man cannot be officially considered his son, Dong-san widens his eyes in shock when the boss reveals that the boy is planning to attack the entire Daejeong faction alone. The gang leader points his index finger across the room, aware that young man's audacity would change everyone's plans there. He shows the gruesome and blood-stained trophy left on the room's floor, serving as undeniable proof that the enemy was defeated. The boss concludes that the boy cornered him by fulfilling the promise to bring the proof, and therefore he has no choice but to act. The experienced criminal lets out a long sigh and accepts that the start of that major war was indeed just declared right there. Dong-san lowers his gaze, looking rather serious, and confirms to the boss that he now perfectly understands the gravity of that situation. The fighter reflects in silence that the arrival of that boy as the adopted son is going to significantly alter the criminal group's course. Moo-wan grits his teeth, demonstrating that concern over future dangers still lingers in all their minds. The ally breaks the silence and seriously questions the leader about what they will do regarding the group's original plan of action. The boss slams his closed hand against the arm of the sofa, stating with absolute conviction that nothing will change regarding their plan. With his glowing eyes flashing, he warns that since the rival was already struck, they need to act even faster now. Do-yoon walks up his neighborhood stairs at night and lets out a long sigh, trying to calm his mind after that tense conversation. The young man looks sideways with a slight smile and recognizes that the gangster is actually an extremely incredible and fair man. He recalls his bold promise to make his new father reach the top of that dangerous city, no matter what. The young protagonist reinforces his thought, aware that that immense objective will surely be his life goal. The memory of the boss asking in an ironic tone if he could really resolve all his problems in such a simple manner. The boy smirks with audacity and answers that obviously things are not as easy as they seem at first glance. Moo-wan recalls the shock he received when the young man firmly stated that he would become his father from that day on. Do-yoon faced the older man seriously and directly questioned if he was wrong to think in such an obstinate manner. Letting out a long sigh, the leader countered that taking on the responsibility of being a father was not a decision taken lightly. The boss seriously explained that taking care of a child demands absolute dedication, and that no matter how much is done, it never seems enough. The young protagonist listened to those important words in silence, keeping his expression entirely cold and focused. The older man asked if, even while knowing all that weight, he would still be willing to move forward with that crazy idea. Without hesitating, Do-yoon answered that, for that very reason, he decided once and for all that he would inherit his family name. He guaranteed with a focused look that he would assume all consequences of his choice upon joining the gang's office. Upon hearing such a mature statement, the criminal organization leader ended up speechless before the young man's firmness. With a half-smile, the man yielded, saying that that justification was already enough for him to accept the young man into his life. The two stood face to face, sealing that important personal agreement that would change the destiny of the entire neighborhood forever. Moo-wan placed his hand over Do-yoon's head, officially accepting him as his new son and partner on that dangerous journey. The boy reflects that even if the man coldly rejected him, he wouldn't have the right to complain about absolutely anything there. Back in the present, Yoon stops in front of his house gate, not knowing for sure how to tell the news to his sister. Suddenly, the girl throws the gate open hard, startling the protagonist, and questions why he's stalling so much to say it. The young man leaps backward, caught completely by surprise, and stammers his sister's name due to the sudden fright. With her arms crossed, she reveals that she already knows about his request to become the adopted son of the local gang leader. Do-yoon scratches his head quite awkwardly and sheepishly asks if she actually managed to overhear that entire conversation of his. The young girl looks at him calmly, showing that she didn't get angry upon discovering the big news about her brother's life. She directly asks if, in the end, things really happened the way he expected them to happen. The young man averts his gaze, a bit sheepish, and confirms that in a way, his agreement with the gang leader worked out very well. She says that's great, because it's very bad when we do something for the first time, and everything goes wrong right at the start of the process. The girl turns toward the door and affectionately tells the young man to get inside the house quickly to eat the meal she prepared. Do-yoon watches his sister's back walk away, quite surprised and touched by her welcoming attitude. He accepts the invitation, thanking her in a low tone, and follows her inside the residence, feeling a massive relief in his heart. The night continues peacefully over the residence of the two siblings, who now face this new reality alongside the local gang. The next morning, all the elite members of the criminal organization gather around the table with young Do-yoon present. Their ally Dong-san breaks the silence, commenting that the atmosphere of that meeting seems a bit tense with the boy sitting there. The boss minimizes the concern, saying from the sofa that they have no choice but to start getting used to his presence. Wan fixes his gaze on the young man, directly asking if he managed to clear the tracks of that combat area after the fight. The young man confirms and calmly explains that only his sister knew everything that occurred, so there was nothing left to hide. The boss leans forward and tells the young man to finally reveal what grand plan he has been thinking up in secret. Do-yoon faces the gangsters and states with conviction that the fastest method to bring down the enemies demands a bold tactic. The young man begins to detail his secret invasion strategy coldly, leaving everyone in the room surprised by his intelligence. One lets out a heavy sigh with his arms open, confessing that he was truly curious to know the young man's thoughts. The experienced boss assumes an extremely serious look and immediately warns that that absurd tactic will never be executed. He explains that small plans allow for failures, but in large missions, everyone's safety must be above any achievement. The gangster firmly warns that if, at the end of the strategy, all 6 present do not make it out alive, he will not authorize the action. One warns that there is no need for haste, and that they must follow the original plan to clear the region slowly. His subordinate Song Jae immediately agrees with the boss's decision, showing total obedience to his orders. Suddenly, the office door is thrown open with extreme violence, unexpectedly interrupting everyone's conversation. Several unknown and loud men invade the place, armed, and sharply ask if that is their office. The invading henchmen take over the entrance of the Gunilpa office in a provocative manner and with threatening expressions. The leader of the gang aggressively grabs the door handle, asking again if that is indeed the correct office. They glare at the owners of the place with arrogance and celebrate having finally found the rival gang's headquarters. Before they could react, one of the strongest allies charges at the intruders like a true flash of fury. Taeju leaps into the air at extreme speed and focuses his first direct attack right against the face of one of the criminals there. With his eyes glowing, he shouts furious insults, demonstrating that he will have no mercy on those henchmen. The enemies at the door widen their eyes, completely terrified as they realize the overwhelming speed of the counterattack. A brutal punch delivered with force hits the first intruder's jaw dead on, causing fluid to fly from the violent impact. Taeju beats the opponents frantically, easily throwing them against the office wall in the blink of an eye. With his fist clenched and his eyes glowing, the fighter prepares to knock out the next opponent who dares approach. He blocks a henchman's attack attempt and lands a very strong direct punch to completely dismantle the enemy. A flying knee strikes the adversary's chest, who cannot defend himself against all that agility from the strong fighter. The young man smoothly dodges the enemy bat and continues his devastating onslaught, knocking 2 more criminals to the floor. Another powerful direct punch strikes the face of another thug, who staggers backward, completely dazed by the brutal impact. Taeju pivots his body firmly on the floor, preparing his next fast attack to clear the rest of the gang's office. A spectacular spinning kick strikes the bald henchman's head dead, who knocks out instantly with a lot of violence. The entire gang of intruders lies defeated on the floor, and Yoon just watches everything in absolute silence and quite calmly. Taeju advances in a hurry toward the last henchman standing, ready to deliver another violent blow to his face. The remaining thug widens his eyes, gripped by pure desperation upon seeing that all his friends were easily knocked out. The hero delivers a destructive right punch right in the middle of the guy's face, breaking his nose mercilessly. The final criminal collapses to the office floor, completing Taeju's overwhelming victory over that loud group. Sitting on his sofa in a relaxed manner, Muwon just observes all that chaos with an expression of absolute boredom. Song Jae and the young protagonist also watch the scene peacefully, showing no concern over the attack. Fallen and quite bruised, the leader of the intruders extends his hand, desperately begging them to stop hitting. The boss speaks up in a calm tone, ordering the strong Taeju to stop the attacks and let the man catch his breath for a bit. Holding the rival by the collar, the fighter halts his punch mid-way, immediately obeying his leader's command. He lowers his hand slowly, confirming his boss's request with a serious and focused gaze turned toward the victim in his hands. The experienced leader gestures with disdain, stating that those intruders are far too weak and offer no real danger to them. Song Jae curiously questions what the true reason was for the gang to invade their office so imprudently. The fallen henchman explains himself, stammering, and confesses that they saw everything that happened in the previous confrontation that same night. He reveals that everyone in his gang witnessed up close the brutal and humiliating defeat of the powerful gangster Choi Dae-up. Song Jae asks mockingly if they invaded the place to take revenge for their partner's defeat or for another reason. The leader of the gang denies it with his hands raised, desperate to clear up the misunderstanding before taking another beating from Taeju. He makes a deep bow on the floor and reveals that, in reality, he came to beg the Granilpa gang to accept them into their group. The criminal explains that they are just a small group with no affiliation, and therefore they declare unconditional surrender from then on. Surprised by the proposal, Song Jae repeats the term, unconditional surrender, aloud, trying to understand the gang's intentions. Yoon explains that the first strategic step for their gang was surely to dominate the Guncheong-dong area. He adds that the second district of the region would come for free, and therefore their focus should be defeat Choi Dae-up. Song Jae questions if their large organization would really hand over that important territory for free and without a fight. He highly doubts that possibility and warns that there is no way their rivals would act in such a peaceful and favorable manner. The dark-haired young man faces his partner firmly and asks what reasons would lead the rivals to give up the area. Yoon displays the regional map, explaining that the neighborhood is actually a land with no economic value that no one wants. The young man details the rival mafia's conflicts of interest, showing that the nearby territories served only for surveillance. He explains that after the leader's removal from the area, the rivals would have no further reason to keep guarding that region. The young man adjusts his watch and reinforces that for the remnants of the other local gangs, only a single alternative would be left. Song Jae nods and concludes seriously that they would indeed just have to bow, or they would be swept away from there. Yoon explains that he attacked Choi Dae-up precisely to give the remaining henchmen a strong reason to surrender for good. The scene cuts to the shadows of a few criminals gathered at the top of a wall under the dark sky of that cold night. He recalls that those who witnessed up close the strength and danger of their rival also witnessed his crushing defeat. With his fist clenched, the young man states with total conviction that they will manage to take control of the territory either way. He guarantees that his strategic plan was designed specifically to absorb control of the entire second district. The young man concludes that if everything goes as expected, the first round of that dispute will already be won without any loss. Song Jae observes the scene in absolute silence and wonders what on earth is passing through the young protagonist's brilliant mind. Do-yoon flashes a slight victorious smile on his face and comments to himself that the moment to act is indeed perfect. He exchanges a look of complicity with his new adoptive father, who keeps watching all that movement across the room. Moo-won narrows his blue eyes, cautiously analyzing the young man's unexpected reaction to the surrender of those opponents. The defeated henchmen remain bowed on the floor, desperately begging for the group to spare their lives there. The organization leader scratches his head, visibly bored, and lets out a tired sigh before that humiliating scene. Song. Jay approaches the boss and asks in a formal tone what they should do with those surrendered criminals on the floor. Moo-won answers with disdain that since they came begging for clemency, the group has no option but to accept. He decides to accept the new members into the gang, but warns in a threatening tone that there will be strict conditions for them to remain there. The boss orders them to stay only in the 2nd District and warns that if their plans fail, the partnership ends instantly. The men thank him in relief, making deep bows, and promise to give their best to honor their new leadership. The leader points to the henchman and orders him to command the remnants and pass all reports directly to Song Jae. The bruised young man accepts the order with enthusiasm and guarantees he will do everything not to disappoint his new boss at work. Letting out another tired sigh, the experienced leader makes a hand signal, indicating for all of them to get out of there soon. The new recruits bow in respect and prepare to leave the meeting room under the watchful eyes of the gangsters. The meeting office door is closed firmly, marking the definitive end of that tense and surprising visit. The elite members of the organization remain, gathered in the center of the room, analyzing the next stages of that major war. The boss turns to Do-jin and orders him to keep guarding and holding firm his strategic position for a while longer. The faithful ally immediately guarantees that he will keep his eyes wide open regarding those traitors to avoid any future trouble. Do-yoon reflects to himself that, in the end, things are happening exactly the way he had planned. The young man assumes a serious look and firmly states that he will accept no more complaints from any of them there. Moo-won glares at the young man with a thoughtful expression, aware that that boy's determination exceeds all expectations. His partner Song Jae also observes the protagonist with a lot of respect, recognizing the genius behind his ideas. The fighter Taeju gives a thumbs up sign, demonstrating that he completely approves of the young man's resolute stance. His ally Do-jin remains silent, demonstrating that he fully trusts the strategic capabilities of that young warrior. His partner Dong Sound faces the protagonist and directly asks him to finally admit his real combat intentions. The young man decides to leave the meeting room, commenting that he already got the message and prefers to get out of there at that moment. Before passing through the door, Do-yoon looks sideways and notifies everyone that he has some important things to prepare. The meeting office door closes firmly, marking the protagonist's definitive exit from that place of debate. In another building, Choi Dae-up walks with firm steps, his ear bandaged, through the luxurious and modern hallways of the corporation. The defeated gangster lets out a heavy sigh, demonstrating that he is quite tense about the important meeting he will have next. He stops before a large wooden door and utters a curse in anger, knowing that his future in the mafia depends on this. He grits his teeth with immense hatred and frustration as he recalls the terrible humiliation he suffered in the fight against the protagonist. He knocks on the door and identifies himself to the director, notifying him that Choi Dae-up has just returned to give an account of his mission. Dae-up enters the luxurious room and makes a deep bow to demonstrate his total respect to the corporation's superior. He explains that he came to offer his greetings and report the news while the director, sitting at the desk, acknowledges his work. The superior asks what the urgent matter is that he needs to report before delivering the corporation's formal greetings. The defeated gangster keeps his head lowered and seriously reveals that the matter in question is about the Guncheong district. With a tense look, he reveals to the superior that everything indicates that the dangerous leader, Kim Moo-won, is about to make his move. The scene returns to young Do-yoon, who walks calmly out of the office after concluding his participation in the debate. He stops for an instant and notifies his companions that he needs to leave there soon to start organizing his own plans. Already outside the office, The young protagonist takes a deep breath and lets out a heavy sigh, trying to regain his calm. With his eyes glowing intensely, Do-yoon confesses to himself that that discussion was indeed a very close call. He begins to walk up the stairs toward his house, with calm and determined steps, focused on his major and dangerous revenge. Someone shouts for them to wait, while the men carry their injured companion up the stairs. One of them turns around, quite irritated and confused, not understanding why he is being interrupted once again. Do-yoon emerges from the shadows, coldly stating that he only returned because he hasn't delivered his message yet. The henchmen begin to complain furiously, saying the brat just got lucky the first time. The protagonist smirks with disdain, stating he expected nothing different from cowards. The henchman shouts in outrage that the young man isn't part of any gang and should respect his elders. With a frightening look, the young man simply challenges him to take the first step and try to attack him again. He fixes his glowing eyes on the opponent and asks ironically if his guard is up. The henchman charges with everything at the young man, delivering an anger-filled punch in the middle of the street. Do-yoon dodges the heavy punch with extreme ease, leaving the adversary completely exposed. He strikes back immediately with a violent punch that hits his opponent's face and throws him backward with everything. The attacker collapses, passed out on the ground, while the others watch that entire scene in absolute shock. The young man analyzes his own hands and asks if they committed so many crimes that they don't even remember the past. He assumes his combat stance and coldly asks if none of them really can recognize him there. One of the henchmen begins to break into a cold sweat upon realizing that that frightening face is truly not unfamiliar to him. He recalls an old incident in the first district and realizes that things are much more serious. The man finally remembers the young man who always disrupted their major operations in the past. The protagonist gives a cynical smile and comments that it seems his memory finally started working again. The henchman trembles in terror upon realizing why his leader had decided to act personally against the boy. He clenches his fists in anger upon noticing that the brat discovered secrets he should have never known. Overcome by desperation, the criminal charges with everything, shouting that he cannot allow the young man to leave there alive. He shouts with fury, reinforcing that the protagonist is too big a threat and needs to be eliminated soon. Do-yoon moves with extreme agility and dodges the punch thrown by the attacker without making an effort. He counters quickly, applying a brutal strike straight into the stomach of the raging adversary. The man spits saliva and widens his eyes, feeling the entire overwhelming impact of that accurate punch. The young man executes a spectacular spinning kick that throws the opponent far away with extreme force. The attacker collapses onto the pavement, and Do-yoon darkly states that, in reality, the one who is going to die there is him. He raises his lead and prepares to deliver a merciless stomp against the defeated adversary's face. A brutal sound of bones cracking echoes through the alley as the protagonist crushes the enemy without pity. The other henchman watching everything becomes completely horrified and freezes with fear at that violence. The young man glares at him coldly, saying he was the only coward acting in the region before the leader's arrival. Do-yoon advances calmly toward the others and comments that he doesn't recognize any of those new faces. The man points to his passed-out friend and begs, saying they have nothing more to do with the past. The protagonist answers that that doesn't change the fact that they are worms, and asks if they are going to challenge orders. He firmly warns that he came to alert them to never underestimate his gang's power and authority. The young man says with a dark glow in his eyes that from now on, there will be no room for cowards in the gang. The man agrees in fear and promises that he himself will take the responsibility to clean up the mess. The protagonist flashes a smirk and comments that it's good to have someone rational there, but warns that he doesn't trust him. He approaches the rival's ear and advises in a threatening tone for him to keep his guard very high. With the message delivered, the hooded young man turns and begins to walk away from the location with slow steps in the dark. The henchman breathes a sigh of relief while murmuring that the rival gang has indeed secured a terrifying monster. He orders his partner to quickly dispose of that body before other people pass through the alley. They begin to pick up their bruised companion, aware that they need to cut ties with their former group. He realizes in shock that the protagonist knows about all the secret and illegal operations of his former boss. The man gulps upon noticing that the young genius is probably planning something much bigger in the city. The young man reflects that the local criminals used orphan trafficking merely to try to rise in the hierarchy. He plans to use this valuable information about the past kidnappings to clear the region faster. The young man looks at the sky and charts his next strategic target in the 3rd district to guarantee his dominance. He smiles, knowing that his adoptive father and his new gang brothers will surely approve of that attitude. Suddenly, a strange noise coming from behind the stairs makes the protagonist stop and look with suspicion. A crumpled envelope falls to the ground, revealing school documents with the protagonist's name. The red-haired bully with a bandage on his nose appears laughing and mocks, saying it was hard to find that humble house. Yoon turns slowly and glares at him with a cold look without demonstrating any kind of surprise. The intruder happens to be the dangerous son of one of the major directors of the massive rival criminal organization. He approaches mockingly, asking if the young man was really the one responsible for defeating their former boss. The two stand face to face in the middle of the dark night, exchanging glares charged with pure hostility. The redhead rants with hatred, stating that his days of glory ended due to the direct fault of the boy's actions. He complains irritably about that threatening and cold glare from the young man, who refuses to bow his head to him. He whispers in Yoon's ear that he will never forget that, and promises to make his life a living hell from now on. The bully threatens, saying he will be hunted wherever he goes, and that he will personally destroy the young man's life. The criminal shoves aggressively against the protagonist's shoulder before walking away, muttering curses. Feeling an immense rage, the young man grits his teeth in absolute silence while controlling his instincts. The envelope with the school records remains dropped in the dirt of the street as a reminder of that humiliation. He looks back, quite worried, wondering if his beloved sister also witnessed that threat. The young man lets out a long sigh and places his hand on his chest, trying to calm his heart after the moment of tension. With calm steps, he pushes the gray iron gate, which opens, emitting a loud creak in the silence of the night. The protagonist enters his house yard, trying to act as naturally as possible so as not to alert anyone. In the major corporation's office, the ally seriously questions if that aggressive attitude didn't go too far. The man places a glass vial containing the severed ear of the rival gang's former leader onto the desk. The bearded director comments that the defeated rival was once an elite fighter respected across the entire country. He drinks straight from the bottle and explains that the young man was used as a shield to deflect the fury of the mafia's superiors. He bites his finger thoughtfully and points out that since the original aggressor was a director's son, the guardian must pay. The boss looks at the liquor bottle, admitting that both he and the defeated rival must take the blame. The subordinate packs the vial into the box and asks if the package should be sent in the team leader's name. With a dark look, the boss confirms that only a striking present like that will finally make the rival act. The scene changes, showing the simple and illuminated residence where the two siblings live in the middle of the humble neighborhood. Yoon's younger sister questions him seriously, asking if he really wishes to test his strength against mafiosos. The young man maintains his firm stance and gives a positive nod, confirming his dangerous plan. The girl glares at him startled and directly asks if her brother lost his mind for good upon making that decision. She desperately recalls how major criminal organizations usually destroy people's lives mercilessly. Trembling in fear, she asks if he forgot that both of their homes were completely ruined because of them. She argues desperately that it makes no sense at all for him to try to face such dangerous criminals acting alone. The young man interrupts the conversation and coldly reveals that their house location has already been discovered by the enemies. The young girl widens her eyes, completely in shock upon receiving that terrible news about their safety. He explains that he needs to prove to himself whether he is indeed strong enough to protect her without depending on anyone. The young man faces her with absolute conviction and repeats that this is the single opportunity to test his true limit. A heavy silence takes over the small kitchen table while the two siblings glare at each other without saying a word. Lowering her gaze with sadness, she insists, saying that even so, she won't let him face all that alone. The girl begs her brother to talk with the strongest allies of the gang and ask them to fight by his side. The protagonist remains in silence, observing his sister with a serious and deeply reflective look. The young man stands up suddenly, scraping the chair, and notifies her that either way, that battle needs to happen. He walks toward the exit and comments with a slight smile that he will accept that advice as a permission from her. The young girl lets out a sigh of surprise upon realizing that her brother used her words to justify his departure. He turns one last time and advises that from now on, she should also move into their adoptive father's house. The girl watches him leave in silence, with a mixture of concern and determination stamped on her face. Through the window of the illuminated living room, it is possible to see the young girl sitting alone, gathering the papers left on the floor. She picks up the quite crumpled paper envelope and analyzes it with a sad look, feeling the weight of that situation. The girl turns intrigued upon recalling that her older brother used the word father to refer to the gang leader. A few silent tears begin to drip onto the wooden floor, revealing the young girl's anguish. She breaks down, crying alone in the middle of the empty room, fearing for her beloved brother's life in that imminent war. A mysterious man wearing a suit walks slowly through the dark street as night falls over the region. He displays a frightening look with his eyes glowing intensely in the darkness, revealing his malicious intention. Meanwhile, the younger sister continues sitting alone in the room, having the slightest idea of the danger lurking around her. The intruder observes the girl through the yard window and lets out a wicked whisper, planning his attack. He comments with disdain that defenseless girl will surely be great bait to draw the protagonist. On the table of the criminal organization's office, several reports and important documents are scattered. The team leader taps his fingers impatiently on the papers while analyzing the gang's current situation. He meets with his most faithful subordinates to map out a swift strategy against the area's rivals. The dark-haired henchman warns that the young protagonist will by no means accept bowing to their orders. The ally confesses that the interference from the remaining members of the rival gang was an unpleasant surprise for everyone. The bearded boss remains in absolute silence, processing the new and complicated challenges that have arisen now. With a decided look, he orders his men to move up the schedule of their original attack plan. The henchmen listen to the new instructions in absolute silence, with serious expressions entirely focused on the mission. The leader alerts that delaying that invasion has become an unacceptable and extremely dangerous risk for the group. He strikes the table, stating that they will receive an answer shortly, and that they need to dominate the 3rd district soon. The meeting goes on at a fast pace, under the dim light of that secret room where the criminals organize the offensive. The subordinate asks with trepidation if this sudden change in the schedule won't bring serious problems for them. The boss makes an analogy, saying that a moving stone is much more devastating if it is interrupted now. The henchmen nod, perfectly understanding the relentless logic explained by their direct superior. He crushes his fist tightly, reinforcing that acting with speed at this moment is the safest option for all of them. In another dark room, a mysterious box with a vial is placed on top of a metal coffee table. The vial containing the gruesome proof of the rivals' defeat glows under the dim lighting of that luxury office. A calloused hand grabs the cardboard box with so much force that it violently crushes the edges of the package. Choi Dae-up trembles with pure fury upon opening the package and seeing the gravity of the insult sent directly to him. His veins pop and his eyes glow with the uncontrollable hatred that consumes his mind instantly. Gritting his teeth, he curses his opponent, realizing that his rival acted in an extremely bold and insane manner. He places his hand on his head in irritation upon noting that he fell into a direct and totally obvious provocation from his adversary. Overcome by rage, the man crushes the glass vial with his own hands, scattering pieces across the entire floor. The glass shatters violently in the air after being thrown against the office wall in a fit of fury. The shards and the metal cap roll along the floor of the room while a tense silence returns to that luxurious environment. The foot clad in an expensive dress shoe steps firmly on the glass shards that were left scattered across the room. Suddenly, the large wooden door of the luxurious office is thrown open noisily, startling those present. The young redhead enters the room with his head bowed, demonstrating extreme nervousness before his powerful and feared father. The director shouts furiously, slamming his hands on the desk, and questions how his son was unable to dominate that district. The boy gulps and remains motionless, enduring the violent scolding without daring to look into his progenitor's eyes. Soft knocks on the door break the tense atmosphere, and the subordinate announces himself with respect from outside the room. The veteran opens the door slowly, drawing the attention of the young redhead, who turns quickly with surprise in his gaze. The young man lets out a slight sigh of relief upon realizing that the interruption might temporarily free him from that scolding. The director turns, irritated by the interruption, and sharply asks who gave him permission to enter there. The experienced criminal makes a deep bow and offers immediate apologies for having intruded on that private meeting. The boss throws himself back into his leather chair, letting out an irritated sigh, and demands to know the reason for that urgency. The subordinate remains bowed and makes an unusual request, soliciting authorization to act alone for a few days. The director observes the two men before his desk, analyzing the situation with considerable caution and suspicion. He narrows his eyes and directly asks if that sudden request is related to their rival, Kim Moo-won. Upon hearing that legendary name, the red-haired young man breaks into a cold sweat, fearing the proportions the situation might take. The veteran confirms seriously, revealing that he received a rather direct invitation that cannot be ignored. The powerful mafia boss glares at him threateningly, trying to read the true intentions behind that response. He taps his fingers on the table thoughtfully and comments with suspicion that he finds that entire story extremely sketchy. The man makes the final decision and authoritatively states that he himself will personally take care of resolving that problem. He makes a hand signal dismissing the henchman and orders him to merely focus on the preparations for his own mission. Choi Dae-op accepts the director's decision submissively and makes a respectful bow before withdrawing from there. He grits his teeth in anger, feeling the weight of humiliation for not being permitted to personally lead the mission. He opens the large wooden door and leaves the luxurious office with a feeling of deep frustration in his mind. The director seriously warns his son that their rival, Kim Moo-won, is dangerous and orders him not to try to act impulsively. The veteran's glare outside glows with anger upon realizing he is being completely underestimated by his bosses. Walking down the hallway, he calms down, knowing that it is indeed not the right moment yet to make his move. The man pulls out his old flip phone, ready to make a secret and very important call that night. The scene changes to the quiet, humble neighborhood where young Do-yoon walks through the empty streets under the lamppost light. Suddenly, a cell phone is thrown from afar, crashing against the concrete wall and falling near the stairs. The broken device rolls until it stops on the pavement, revealing that someone tried to destroy any proof of contact. The hooded protagonist walks with slow and determined steps toward the indicated location in the middle of the silent alley. He checks the address on a small crumpled piece of paper, silently concluding that his destination is indeed right around there. The young man continues his search, looking for the characteristic color of the gate that serves as a reference point in the area. He finally stops before a large and mysterious blue gate, confirming that that is the hideout he was looking for. With a cold look, the young man murmurs to himself that his enemies indeed chose a great place to hide. With quick and silent movements, he opens a crack in the gate to invade the property without being seen by anyone. The young man enters the humble yard of that abandoned house, keeping his guard high against any surprise attack. He observes his surroundings with redoubled attention, carefully analyzing every detail of that dark and empty environment. Do-yoon approaches the main door upon hearing a male voice, talking on the phone from inside the location. The muscular henchman in a gray tank top smokes a cigarette, while guaranteeing over the phone that all the merchandise was moved. He explains that he is just waiting for his partner Gwang, sick, to arrive to shut down that night's activities for good. Suddenly, the wooden door is violently broken down with an accurate and powerful kick delivered by the protagonist. The young man enters the room, displaying a terrifying glow in his eyes, and questions the criminal about that humble life. The criminal widens his eyes completely in shock upon seeing the sudden entrance of that intruder into his hideout. He immediately hangs up the phone call and glares at the intruder with anger, quickly realizing who it is. The brute stands up calmly and walks toward the protagonist, complaining with disdain about his delay. He greets the boy in an extremely ironic and threatening manner, demonstrating that he fears no danger there. The henchman in the tank top gives a wicked smile and directly asks if the two of them haven't met in the past. The young man analyzes the criminal's face and concludes with disdain that the information obtained from his group was indeed right. Do-Yoon notices that the opponent was already expecting him and reflects that there are even more hidden secrets behind that entire action. He asks coldly if the man received the information directly from the mall infiltrated in their allied faction. Furious at the boy's petulance, the brute launches into the attack, delivering an extremely powerful and rapid punch. Do-Yoon dodges with mastery and silently concludes that the traitor is indeed the only one who knew of his existence. The opponent continues attacking with desperate violence, but the young man deflects all the strikes with ease. The brute delivered a heavy punch that strikes the protagonist's face dead on, pushing his head to the side. The attacker smiles maliciously upon seeing the impact of his punch, believing that the combat is totally decided in his favor. He delivers a brutal sequence of continuous punches, pushing the young man against the room's wall with extreme violence. However, with his eyes glowing, the young man quickly dodges the next strike and prepares to counter. The young man strikes back with an overwhelming punch that hits the brute's jaw dead on, leaving him completely without reaction. The criminal grimaces in pure pain and spits fluid upon feeling the massive force of that young man's counterattack. The protagonist executes a devastating sequence of fast and accurate strikes that instantly throw the rival off balance. Staggering and clutching his chest with considerable difficulty, the opponent backs away while muttering curses with a lot of anger, without giving his rival time to recover. Do-Yoon connects another accurate and powerful right hook below his jaw. The man collapses against the kitchen counter, knocking over bottles, and fearfully notices that the situation is very bad for him. Desperate for an advantage in the fight, the criminal extends his arm swiftly and grabs a heavy glass bottle. He swings through the air with fury, shouting in outrage that everyone suddenly decided to collect scores for actions that occurred in the past. The glass bottle shatters violently against the protagonist's arms, who blocks the attack with ease. Taking advantage of the moment of exposure, the young man advances rapidly and lands a very violent straight punch to the opponent's chest. The brute is knocked down onto the kitchen floor and tries to strike back, shouting that he only learned a few boxing moves. The young man shuts him up by delivering a merciless punch to his face and coldly decrees that his provocations have come to an end. The attacker struggles with fury, shouting that cowardly brats like him are not ready to see real bloodshed. He raises his arm with violence, ridiculing the accusation that he would be just a mere human trafficker. The henchman shoves him with everything against the floor and promises to dismember the protagonist's body right there. A violent strike is delivered in the middle of that chaos, generating a massive physical impact in the middle of the room. Suddenly, the man lets out a cry of pure pain upon having his arm grabbed with extreme force by the protagonist. Do-Yoon holds him with an unbreakable iron grip, preventing any escape attempt from the infuriated aggressor. With impressive agility, the young man sweeps the rival's legs, executing a perfect trip to bring him down. The brute is thrown onto his back against the floor with a brutal impact that makes the entire structure of the place shake. The hooded young man takes advantage of the opponent's fall and readies his clenched fist to deliver the final blow. He smashes the criminal's face against the floor in a merciless attack charged with pure determination. Another crushing punch connects with full force on the defeated adversary to ensure he doesn't stand up again. Completely bruised and defeated, the man hears the protagonist demand that he answer one last question. The young man looks down at him with total contempt, questioning if his strength comes anywhere near the strength of the faction's headquarters. The man grits his teeth, feeling the weight of humiliation for being compared in such a depreciative manner to the others. With his face bruised, Do-yoon coldly warns that he hopes his rival hasn't overestimated his own skills. Taking a few steps forward, the protagonist warns in a dark tone that he will indeed ask just one final question to him. He demands to know the exact location to where the children kidnapped in the past were sent by that cruel gang. The gangster laughs cynically and asks if he really believes he will manage to save the victims with that attitude. Ignoring his rival's mockery, the protagonist reaches down and grabs a sharp piece of a broken glass bottle. He approaches the fallen man again, repeating the word, "Cotitude," in an extremely terrifying and threatening whisper. Without any hesitation, the young man drives the broken glass into his adversary's leg, making him let out a desperate cry. With a completely impassive look, Do-yoon asks if this level of determination is enough to convince him. While the enemy agonizes in pain on the floor, the young man coldly orders him once and for all to answer the question. The protagonist presses the open wound with his foot, forcing the rival to finally reveal the whole truth hidden there. The hooded young man demands the answer immediately, while the opponent trembles and cries in pure terror before the torture. Completely broken physically, the gangster finally gives in and confesses that the victims were sent to the mafia's branch office. The traitor Gwang-sik emerges by surprise and asks mockingly if the young man really thinks he will manage to reach that far. Do-yoon ignores the arrival of the new enemy and presses even harder on the other opponent's wound, demanding the full answer. The young man glares at him coldly and directly orders him to finish revealing the whole truth about their whereabouts. The man agonizing on the floor desperately repeats that the destination location is indeed the dreaded Daejeong branch office. Gwang-sik gives a wicked smile and questions again if the young man actually has the courage to invade that enemy territory. Losing his patience, the traitor goes on the attack, grabbing the protagonist from behind in a very aggressive manner. He tries to immobilize the young man, applying a chokehold to try to end the combat quickly right there. However, with impressive strength and speed, Do-yoon disables the move with a violent backward elbow strike. The traitor backs away, shouting in pain, and fearfully notices that the protagonist's physical strength exceeds all expectations. He tries to regain the advantage by advancing again, but the young man dodges with mastery, leaving him totally exposed. With surgical speed, Do-yoon grabs his enemy's head firmly, preparing a brutal sequence of strikes. He delivers a devastating knee strike directly to Gwang-sik's face, causing fluid to splash from the brutal impact. The traitor's nose breaks instantly, and he is thrown backward by the overwhelming power of that strike. Completely dazed and bruised, the adversary tries to maintain his balance, while the young man prepares for the final strike. A direct right punch hits the traitor's mouth dead on, ending any chance of defense he still had. Gwang-sik collapses violently onto the kitchen floor, completely knocked out and without strength to react. Fluid spreads across the wood, revealing the extreme brutality of that punishment executed by the young protagonist. Do-yoon walks slowly over to the fallen traitor and pronounces his name with an extremely chilling and calm tone of voice. He coldly warns his opponent that the situation has changed and reminds him that they are no longer in the city's first district. The young man grabs him tightly by the collar of his red jacket, reinforcing that he won't have any ally to help him there. He reveals with hostility that the only reason he spared the traitor's life in the past was not due to his indecision. Fixing his murderous and merciless gaze, the young man states that he was simply waiting for the perfect moment to act. He tightens the traitor's collar with a lot of force, guaranteeing that from the start, he was prepared to commit the worst actions. The protagonist glares at him with unwavering fury and threateningly asks if he really doubts his capability. Gwang-sik can barely breathe from so much pain and tries to stammer something while being hoisted by his shirt collar. The protagonist releases him with extreme violence, causing the traitor's body to slam hard against the kitchen floor. The traitor spits a lot of fluid onto the floor, while the young man observes him from the shadows with a completely fierce look. Do-yoon faces him coldly and asks a direct question, questioning if he really has the desire to remain alive. With a terrifying smile, he warns that to spare his life, the traitor will have to pay a very high price that night. The young man says his life now belongs to Choi Daeop, leaving the henchman trembling and stammering in pure desperation. He mocks his opponent's stupidity, wondering how someone so foolish managed to survive in the criminal world. He commands the enemy to reveal a secret so grave that it would make Choi Daeop himself beat him to death if he knew. The traitor widens his eyes, gripped by absolute terror upon realizing he is cornered between life and death there. The young man asks intimidatingly if he is more afraid of the distant leader or of the monster standing right before him. Gwang-sik tries to stammer an excuse, begging Do-yoon to say exactly what he wishes to know so he can confess. The traitor begins to reveal that the kidnapped youths with a good appearance were sold for high prices to illicit venues. The protagonist steps with blind fury on the traitor's chest upon hearing that the children were sold to those places. The desperate man confirms shakingly that that type of merchandise is indeed extremely rare and lucrative for them. Gwang-sik confesses that the other victims were taken to a branch company while the other aggressor emerges from behind. Suddenly, the brute attacks Gwang-sik cowardly from behind, delivering a fatal blow to silence him for good. The traitor's fluid splashes violently, even hitting the young protagonist's face, who watches everything. The traitor widens his eyes, unable to believe that he ended up eliminated by his own partner in crime. The man agonizes on the floor, whispering his last words of regret before losing consciousness completely. Do-yoon steps with violence over the fallen traitor's body and tells the other attacker to shut his mouth once and for all. Out of breath and quite weak, the brute mutters with hatred that his partner should have kept the mafia's secrets. Without strength to remain standing, the injured attacker collapses to the room's floor beside his dead former companion. The young protagonist lets out a sigh of boredom while observing that entire chaotic scene that formed around him. Do-yoon walks slowly toward the fallen brute and asks ironically if the leg injury wasn't enough. He grabs the man by his tank top firmly, warning that either way, his hour would also arrive very soon. The bruised brute glares at him mockingly and questions what a brat like him really thinks he can do. He shouts with fury, challenging the protagonist to finish him off, since now no one else there knows any other information. He mocks the young man, asking if he really thinks a gang veteran is going to bow before some random kid. The man holds Do-yoon's arm with hatred and asks how the young man dares act so arrogant before a superior. With his eyes glowing, the protagonist just listens to the criminal challenge him to attack him or finish him right there. Without wasting time, Do-yoon lands a violent headbutt right in the middle of his adversary's face, catching him completely by surprise. The brute lets out a cry of pure pain from the brutal impact that breaks his nose and leaves him completely dazed. The protagonist grabs his head with both hands and smashes the criminal's face against his knee relentlessly. The man shouts desperately, begging him to stop that terrible torture, but Do-yoon shows no pity. The young man displays a terrifyingly cold look while he continues, crushing his opponent against the floor with extreme force. A large amount of fluid splashes against the room's wall, revealing the overwhelming violence of that attack. The young man raises his head with his face covered in fluid, maintaining a completely serious expression without any remorse. Completely terrified, the criminal finally yields and desperately shouts the name of Choi Daeop's shell company. He cries, confessing that the company is a small illegal organization that their former boss created hidden from the board. He begs for his own life while the protagonist looks down at him with an extremely dark and grim smile. Do-yoon approaches the fallen man and calmly asks what the destination location was for the other kidnapped children. Pressing the criminal's head, the young man forces him to confess that the delivery point was in the region's 4th district. The gangster recalls shakingly that they simply delivered the victims in a suitcase and received the payment right after. He cries and begs on his knees, swearing that that is the whole truth, and asks for the young man to spare his life either way. Do-yoon lets go of him and begins to walk away while the man thanks him and promises to serve the protagonist for the rest of his days. The young man calmly wipes the fluid from his face, using his coat sleeve as he walks toward the exit of the place. His glowing eyes flash intensely in the darkness, revealing that he does not intend to leave any witness alive. The young man turns suddenly and delivers a fatal stomp to the criminal's neck, saying that the others also promised that. Yoon goes to the property's yard and uses a hose to clean the fluid off his hands and his bruised face. He turns off the faucet, letting out a long sigh of exhaustion, knowing that his true war just started right there. Yoon uses his own shirt to dry his sweaty and bruised face under the dim light of a lamppost. He walks away from that hideout, coldly cursing the criminals for committing such heinous crimes. The young man checks the messages on his cell phone and realizes that things have spiraled completely out of control in his area. He gulps upon seeing the notifications and feels a massive chill down his spine at the possibility of the worst having occurred. The screen displays 19 missed calls and a single new message received at 9:44. The young man opens the device shakingly, wondering what on earth could have happened in that short interval of time. His eyes widen in the darkness when he finally reads the words written in that text message. The text sent by his trusted ally alerts directly and urgently that his beloved younger sister has disappeared. Yoon begins running desperately through the neighborhood's empty streets, completely ignoring his physical exhaustion. The young man opens the place door noisily, startling his ally who was already awaiting him inside the room. He runs through the rooms with hurried and violent steps, desperately looking for any sign of his sister. The room is completely messy with clothes scattered across the floor, indicating there was an aggressive invasion at the location. The young man stops in the middle of the mess with his eyes wide in pure terror upon realizing that the worst indeed happened. He bitterly recalls his last warning, asking the girl to move into the safety of their adoptive father's house. He remembers the young girl's worried and reluctant reaction, refusing to accept that situation of imminent danger. The young man recalls his promise that soon they would be adults and could finally have a peaceful life free of crime. He squeezes the doorknob tightly upon recalling the moment he confessed that he also felt fear of that reality. The young man remembers saying that he was facing all those dangers simply to ensure she would never fear again. The final image of her crying in silence with a sad look torments the young man's mind, who now feels immense guilt. Standing at the door of the empty room, the young man curses himself in thought for being so stupid as to leave her alone. He crushes his fist with so much force that his knuckles begin to crack, demonstrating an uncontrollable fury. He tries to regain control of his emotions, but the rage over his sister's kidnapping completely consumes his mind. Calm and firm steps echo through the residence hallway, announcing the sudden arrival of another person at the location. His ally Song, Jay opens the bedroom door slowly and faces the young man with a very serious and worried expression. The man calmly asks if the young man indeed just returned, and Do-yoon merely nods. He explains that he arrived first because he was close by and warns that the disorder in the house confirms something very grave occurred there. He reveals that some neighbors from the vicinity spotted several extremely suspicious men loitering around the area. The young man wonders intriguingly what the enemy's reason would be to focus the attack directly on his sister. With a terrifying glow in his eyes, he firmly states that they need to look up their allied branch company, Song. Jay opens a bottle of mineral water in surprise and repeats the company name, trying to understand the reasons for the suspicion. He extends his arm in a friendly manner, handing the drink to the tired young man to recover after all that running. The ally walks from one side to the other and questions what the real connection of that illegal location is to the young girl's kidnapping. The young man holds the bottle and answers with total seriousness that the two matters actually have no direct connection. He fixes his sharp gaze in absolute silence, aware that the kidnapper's real intentions are much worse. He coldly reveals that the true goal behind that entire kidnapping plan is actually himself. The ally asks in surprise if that suspicion was based on the information obtained from the henchmen of the 2nd District. The young man drinks the water quickly and slightly agrees, admitting that it's hard to fully trust the word of criminals. Song Jae analyzes him worriedly and affectionately asks if the young protagonist indeed suffered no injury. Do-yoon deflects the subject, answering that those insignificant adversaries didn't offer the slightest kind of real danger. The man agrees, nodding his head, and states that finding the girl's whereabouts must be their highest priority right there. Yoon explains that the director's son was at their house recently, and his guardian surely knew about the invasion. The ally places his hand on his chin thoughtfully and slightly agrees, admitting that all that logic makes a lot of sense indeed. He observes the young man in silence, noting that Yoon is usually calm but acts imprudently when his sister is the target. The man agrees that acting is their only alternative and begins making an urgent call to his superior. He places his hand on the young man's shoulder and guarantees that the organization leader will surely set out to help them immediately. Song Jae reveals that their strong partner Bang Tae, Jo-yu, is already outside conducting searches for suspects in the area. On the phone, the ally confirms to the gang boss that the young man returned safely and shows no serious injuries. Suddenly, the man's expression changes, and he questions the boss in surprise upon hearing news about the girl's whereabouts. The leader, Moo-won, confirms from inside the car that their ally Tae-ju indeed spotted tracks of the shell company nearby. He warns seriously that the branch is located right on the borders of the 2nd District and hangs up the call in a hurry. Speaking on his cell phone, the bearded ally warns that he will take control and tells them to keep an eye on the protagonist. Right after, the fellow snaps his old folding phone shut with full force, making a loud noise. Thoughtfully, the man murmurs the name of the enemy corporation that had already been bothering him for quite some time. In the middle of the dark night, a gray car brakes sharply on the empty street near a lamppost. Upon stepping out of the vehicle, the bearded boss is received by a young partner who makes a respectful bow. With that, the leader finds all that exaggerated formality strange and asks the reason he is acting like that. But suddenly, the veteran slowly turns his face back upon noticing something quite strange at the location. On the ground lie 2 lookouts in white helmets, completely bruised after a violent confrontation. Relieved, the partner explains that he needed to knock those guys out before they could cause trouble. At that, the 2 men watch the vehicle drive away down the road while planning their next move. Walking, the young man in the dark jacket asks about the kidnapped girl, but the other says they know little. The bearded man then states with total certainty that someone very powerful behind everything gave that bad order. Resolute, the partners walk together toward the main entrance of that suspicious firm to investigate. With a mocking smile, the younger one says they need to find out if that earless rival is involved in this. Inside a dark warehouse, the protagonist's younger sister is tied to a chair with her mouth gagged. Glaring with anger, she listens to the kidnapper's voice asking if she finally managed to calm down there. The mysterious kidnapper smiles in a bizarre way and asks if she is just a naive girl or very foolish. He keeps taunting the tied-up young girl and asks if she indeed possesses a lot of courage to glare at him like that. At that, the criminal approaches her ear, mocking that she must think she has an ace up her sleeve. He grabs the hostage's hair tightly and warns that things are not going to happen the way she planned. With a wicked smile, the villain says he would love to finish her off soon, because he is almost losing his patience. He walks around the chair, complaining that it had been a long time since they captured someone so valuable. At that, the attacker pulls her head back aggressively while the girl tries to shout for help. Suddenly, the thug turns around irritated and sharply asks if she is trying to buy time there. Looking at the gold watch on his wrist, he warns that they are professionals and do a clean job. Smiling mockingly, the criminal looks at the display and maliciously says that it is already getting quite late. Moving slowly away from the gagged hostage, the fellow begins a countdown out loud. He places his hand on the dark door handle while pronouncing the second number in a very paused manner. A silent tear streams down the young girl's face at the moment the bizarre countdown comes to an end. But at that instant, the large door is suddenly opened by an accomplice warning that the getaway vehicle has arrived. Holding a black cloth hood, the villain asks ironically if that was exactly what she expected to hear. Quickly, the attacker places the dark sack over the young girl's head to prevent her from seeing the way. With a malicious look, he warns that her final destination now will be the criminal organization's dreaded headquarters. Outside the residence, the ally in the trench coat observes the yard with an expression of astonishment and dread. The young protagonist also widens his eyes, not understanding the reason those intruders are standing right there. In the house yard, several henchmen armed with metal bars suddenly appear, blocking their path. One of the blonde henchmen comments in a sarcastic manner that they received direct orders to watch the location. With a terrifying smile, the fellow warns that they will have to vacate that territory much faster. It all starts with a gray metal door being thrown open, revealing the arrival of someone mysterious. Walking with a serious expression, the two allies enter the room while looking around very carefully. The bearded man mentions that the situation outside is a complete mess, but inside everything looks pretty clean. At that moment, they enter the hall and find 4 rival henchmen eating and drinking peacefully. Upon noticing the intruders, the opponents stand up in surprise, complaining about the size of the place. The protagonist lets out a heavy sigh of exhaustion, completely ignoring the henchmen's complaints. With a cold and frightening stare, the leader seriously questions the whereabouts of the missing girl. Furious at that attitude, the bullies charge forward, shouting insults and holding glass bottles. Just then, one of the thugs throws a green bottle with great force in an attempt to hit the intruder. The bearded leader maintains his firm stance, showing no sign of fear in the face of that aggression. Suddenly, an extremely fast blur passes by him, initiating a devastating counterattack in the room. The ally skillfully dodges the thrown object, leaving the rival opponent completely exposed. The bully widens his eyes in fear as he realizes the frightening speed of the young man right in front of him. Holding a green bottle, the young man gives a wicked smile, warning that he doesn't intend to make this fight easy. With his eyes glowing intensely, he prepares to deliver a crushing blow against his opponents. The young man charges forward with everything, striking the henchman who was trying to defend himself using a heavy gray iron bar. The aggressor makes a face of pure terror as he realizes he won't be able to block his opponent's strike. The glass bottle shatters violently against the rival's head, creating a very brutal impact. The enemy collapses unconscious onto the ground while the other henchmen retreat, completely terrified. But wasting no time, the young man positions himself again, sliding his foot on the ground to deliver more strikes. Punch hits the face of another thug, causing a large amount of fluid to splash instantly. Gritting his teeth in anger, the injured opponent tries to recover from that devastating impact from the young man. The aggressor throws a fast punch, but the protagonist dodges the attack with extreme physical ease. With impressive agility, the hero connects a very powerful straight punch right into his opponent's stomach. The crushing blow hits the rival's jaw, leaving the criminal completely dazed and without any reaction. Quickly, the accomplice on the ground grabs a sharp piece of green glass to attempt a cowardly attack. The bully runs desperately toward the young man, holding the improvised weapon with a lot of aggression. But with superhuman reflexes, the protagonist slides under the attack, avoiding serious injury there. He takes advantage of the opening and lands a devastating right hook that completely throws the enemy off balance. The brutal impact knocks fluid and teeth out of the opponent, who is thrown against the wall with extreme force. The rival falls completely knocked out, returning a heavy silence to that hall filled with shattered glass. Suddenly, the last henchman raises a huge wooden bar, ready to strike the young man from behind. The young man notices the dangerous approach and dodges the wooden strike, which cuts through the air with great force. With agility, the hero slides precisely and positions himself strategically behind the aggressor. He readies his clenched fist and glares at his opponent with an expression filled with pure hostility. The overwhelming punch connects with full force, destroying the last chance of defense the criminal had. Watching all that chaos, the bearded boss maintains his calm posture, showing no surprise whatsoever. He makes a hand signal, ordering his ally to leave that last fallen henchman in peace for now. The young man questions the boss, pointing to the defeated aggressor, and asks if he shouldn't just finish him off right away. Unconcerned, the leader simply says that he can do whatever he wants with the rest of the criminal gang. With slow steps, the veteran approaches one of the injured men lying near the metal shelves. Squatting down, the man demands to know the exact location of the victims. While the gangster stammers in pure terror, The prisoner explains shakingly that they only received direct orders to guard the faction's abandoned warehouse. The veteran narrows his eyes and intimidatingly opposes the name of the dangerous rival criminal leader. Desperate, the henchman tries to deny it, stammering excuses while trembling with fear in the face of that serious accusation. Without saying a word, the man picks up another sharp piece of broken bottle from the concrete floor. Showing a fierce look, he repeats the criminal boss's name, pressing the opponent to reveal everything. Crying in terror, the bruised bully finally gives in, confirming that that was indeed his order. The bearded man lets out a long sigh of exhaustion, realizing that the situation is indeed much worse than he imagined. He recalls the violent clashes that occurred in the past when the team moved to that district. Squatting down, the bearded leader asks if they were responsible for the welcome they received before. The injured attacker explains that he just joined the group and that the main team knows the details. With his eyes glowing with anger, the man demands to know the exact location of where the other thugs are. At that, the henchman trembles in pure terror, realizing that he won't be able to hide the secret for much longer. The criminal confesses that the gang went to the first district to try to get someone important out of the way. He lowers his head in defeat, realizing that he made a terrible mistake by revealing that information. With that, the leader stands up calmly and decides that he has already gotten what he needed from that fallen opponent. At that moment, the bearded man calls over his strong ally to prepare their next invasion plan for the area. The veteran orders his partner to clean out the warehouse. As he walks away toward the exit of the hideout, the scene changes, showing an enemy with a smirk on his face, demanding that they leave there very quickly. The guy scoffs, saying that if they understood the warning, they should get out of that area as soon as possible. Suddenly, several henchmen run toward the young men, armed with pieces of metal and a lot of aggressiveness. The malicious blonde warns his accomplices that they need to capture the young protagonist completely alive right there. But the ally in the trench coat starts putting on his black leather gloves as he prepares for combat. Just then, an immense arm covered in tattoos appears from behind the villain and grabs him by the neck with extreme force. The henchman widens his eyes, gripped by absolute terror as he realizes he fell into a fatal trap set by the group. He tries to struggle desperately, but the iron grip on his neck prevents any attempt at a reaction. The other criminals shout in fear, wondering whose mysterious arm that appeared out of nowhere. The blonde aggressor is slammed brutally onto the concrete floor by the huge ally in the dark shirt. The muscular giant with blue hair warns that the enemy gang has indeed ended up arriving quite late. The friend in the trench coat prepares himself, saying ironically that they are going to pay for this delay with their bodies. At that, one of the opponents wearing a white mask runs over angrily, ready to start the brawl. The guy runs with his eyes full of hatred, believing that he will be able to defeat his opponents with ease. But his pupils widen in absolute shock as he notices that his opponent's strength is infinitely superior. The masked aggressor is knocked to the ground with a single devastating punch delivered by the tattooed giant. The other henchman in the baseball cap steps back trembling, realizing that the rumors about that group's strength were real. Without giving time for reactions, the muscular man lands a very violent straight punch that sends the guy's cap flying away. The young protagonist watches that demonstration of absolute power with a surprised expression on his face. With heavy steps, the large tattooed guy walks toward the next opponent, who is trembling in pure terror right there. His eyes glow intensely in the darkness, revealing that he will have no mercy on the intruders. The giant delivers another violent blow right to the thug's face, causing a large pool of fluid to splash. The criminal is thrown backward, falling completely unconscious to the ground after suffering the brutal impact. The ally approaches, wondering why the empty residence is full of enemy henchmen in the area. He adjusts his coat thoughtfully, assuming that the other leader must have also returned without any useful clues. Do-Yoon reflects in silence that this whole situation might actually be a massive trap set by their rivals. The two companions theorize that the leaders of the rival mafia are probably acting separately. The scene changes, showing the young red-haired hare annoyed because his henchmen are not answering his cell phone, shouting in hatred. The red-haired hare complains that things are not turning out the way he planned in the area. The assistant in the suit tries to calm him down, saying that the gang has probably just started moving. Furious, the redhead charges toward the subordinate, shouting that he doesn't want to hear their ridiculous excuses right now. Holding the man by the collar of his suit, he tells the assistant to remember his position very well. The redhead turns away in annoyance because those incompetent henchmen can't do a single job right. With that, the young man opens his folding cell phone furiously and questions whether the henchmen know how he survived. He complains that his father's men don't respect him and decides to put his own plan into action in the area. Showing a wicked smile, the young man guarantees that he also has a perfect strategy to crush his rivals. The scene returns to the yard, where the ally in the trench coat continues analyzing the current situation in the district. The protagonist recalls the moment when the injured opponent revealed the name of the 4th district in the region. The attacker swore in tears that he didn't know anything else besides where to dress, where they took the girl. Yoon turns in a hurry and asks his friend to tell the leader that they need to leave for there immediately. The young protagonist starts running desperately through the dark night, determined to rescue his younger sister. Yoon starts running, but his ally in the trench coat shouts, trying to call him back immediately. Ignoring the warning, the hooded young man keeps running in a hurry toward the dangerous location indicated. Meanwhile, the man in the trench coat walks over to the henchman lying on the ground and warns that he knows he is awake. With a dark look, he asks if the thug really wants to take even more of a beating before revealing everything. The scene changes, showing the young protagonist running at high speed through the dark streets of the district. He reflects with anger that if the other director were involved, rescuing his sister would be much easier. In a dead-end alley, a group of juvenile delinquents waits silently for someone's arrival. One of the youths mocks the approaching opponent, reminding him that it has been a long time since he ran away from school. Another bully spits on the concrete floor, asking if it was really the protagonist who defeated the redhead. The thug in the brown jacket scoffs at the young man's poverty, questioning what he really thinks he accomplished there. He rolls up his shirt sleeves aggressively, complaining that his gang had to clean up that mess. The hooded protagonist just looks down at the aggressor with a cold and completely indifferent gaze. The bully charges forward shouting, but the hero grabs his arm and delivers a violent punch right in the middle of his face. With the brutal impact, the opponent collapses unconscious onto the wet pavement under the young man's deadly gaze. The other delinquents widen their eyes in absolute shock upon noticing the protagonist's massive strength. With his eyes lit up, the hooded young man warns that their mindset indeed remains just like a child's. Trembling and breaking into a cold sweat, one of the bullies curses the hero, realizing they stand no chance of victory there. The hero advances slowly, declaring that that is exactly why not even the red-haired hare will be able to win. At that, the protagonist charges toward the rest of the group, running very quickly into the darkness. One of the henchmen freezes in fear at the young man's rapid approach, unable to make any reaction. The hero delivers a devastating flying knee that hits the chest of the opponent in the gray jacket dead on. The sound of the violent impact echoes throughout the dark alley as thug is thrown far away. The attacker lying on the concrete floor groans in pure pain. Clutching his own chest with great difficulty, the young protagonist watches their defeat without showing any kind of fatigue or hesitation there. He steps firmly on the ground, preparing to interrogate the rest of the fallen criminal gang. The young man demands to know more information about his younger sister's whereabouts while his rivals tremble with fear. He murmurs with contempt, wondering why criminals use teenagers as a shield in that area. Clenching his bruised fists, the young man is completely certain that the redhead indeed planned the entire kidnapping. Desperate, the delinquents shout at each other, suggesting they call the other accomplices from downstairs. Upon hearing that conversation, the protagonist wonders if there are even more opponents hiding in the place. With that, he runs toward the building's entrance, ignoring the fallen ones to contain the other dangers. The alley reflects that if they let the young man handle that alone, he will indeed become much stronger. The partner in the suit says that the boy is smart and knows very well how to act strategically in a fight. The large tattooed guy sighs and agrees that the best option for now is just to observe the young man's actions. He adds that the enemy gang indeed sent a much larger number of henchmen than they expected. The alley states that the highest priority is to rescue the young girl and then eliminate the entire rival faction. Big Guy agrees in silence, aware that the main combat is indeed approaching very fast. He warns that he is going to keep watch over the second district and asks his partner to text him if anything important happens. The man thinks that this division of forces within the rival mafia is actually a great opportunity for them to act. The scene changes, showing a gangster carrying the tied-up young girl on his shoulder as he walks up the building's stairs. With firm steps, the kidnapper heads up toward the rooftop, keeping the girl immobilized with no chance of escape. He walks along the building's rooftop humming, believing that the cruel plan was indeed a total success. Another henchman greets him with a respectful bow and thanks him for the excellent job done there. Hidden behind a wall, a guy in a beanie watches all that movement with a lot of suspicion. Secretly, the man makes a call, warning the person on the phone that the rival mafia members are not at the location. He questions his superior about what should be done from now on regarding that delicate situation there. The young protagonist reappears with a bruised face, keeping his gaze focused and filled with pure determination. He steps with extreme violence on the chest of a fallen opponent, demanding immediate answers about his sister. Out of breath, the young man looks at the pile of defeated delinquents on the ground after the violent clash in the alley. He realizes that that entire onslaught by the henchmen was actually just a strategy to buy time. The protagonist walks slowly over to the fallen attacker in the blue shirt, who is trying to crawl away desperately. Squatting down, the hooded young man starts searching the pockets of the injured opponent, ignoring his protests. With that, the hero finds the rival's cell phone and coldly announces that he is going to borrow the device. Outraged, the youth in the blue jacket yells at the protagonist, demanding his cell phone back right away. But in response, the hero delivers a fast punch right in the middle of the opponent's face to shut him up for good in the alley. The attacker collapses completely unconscious on the pavement after suffering the violent impact from the hooded young man. Looking on with contempt, the hero mocks the thug's previous words, pointing out that friends usually help each other. He warns in a dark tone that he will indeed use that borrowed cell phone to communicate with their boss. With that, the young man begins typing on the glowing keypad of the cell phone as he prepares his final move. Yoon hears the furious voice of the red-haired hare, ordering his henchmen to quickly finish off the young man in the district. In a chilling tone of voice, the hero tells his red-haired rival to stop everything immediately if he wants to stay alive. The hero warns that he only tolerated the opponent's antics at school. But the situation has now changed out on the street. On the other end of the line, the redhead widens his eyes in fear as he catches his breath and recognizes his enemy. Without giving any further explanation, the hooded young man simply closes the phone, ending the contact right then. With a dark smile on his face, he concludes that the spoiled hare is indeed the brains behind the kidnapping. He steps firmly over the body of the fallen attacker, guaranteeing that he will put an end to this plan once and for all. But suddenly, the hero hesitates for a moment and decides to lift his foot from the ground as he remembers something else. At that, his strong partner in the dark shirt appears at the location and warns that they need to head down immediately. The large tattooed guy points out that their time is running out and that every second there is indeed very valuable. Walking in a hurry, the two partners leave the fallen ones behind while searching for a quick escape route. The young protagonist lets out a relieved sigh, but remains alert for any enemy surprises in the area. With a swift movement, the young man throws the green cell phone into the darkness, so as not to leave any trace of it. The broken device flies through the air and crashes noisily onto the pavement, shattering upon impact. On the illuminated screen, you can still see the name of the red-haired hair desperately calling back. Inside the mafia car, the henchman in the suit informs the boss that he will be traveling in the back seat along with the prisoner. The driver in the dark suit complains about that unusual situation, guaranteeing that doesn't belong to their group. Annoyed, the boss delivers a violent slap to his ally's face, telling him to stop talking nonsense. He complains angrily as he notices the cold, threatening look that his subordinate maintains right before him. Suddenly, several henchmen armed with iron bars appear at the scene, blocking the vehicle's exit. The enemy gang advances aggressively, delivering fast and precise strikes against the men in suits. The driver complains that the other faction hid extremely valuable information about the entire mission. At that, he rants that due to that extra danger, the rescue price should be 4 times higher. With an insane look, the gangster shouts in hatred, questioning how they dared to make things easy for the group. But his allies continue taking a violent beating, being pushed against the bodywork of the black car. The combat turns into an all-out brawl, with heavy punches and a lot of fluid splashing onto the wet pavement. One of the henchmen takes a crushing punch that breaks his teeth and throws him backward onto the ground. Surprised, the leader inside the vehicle wonders where such strong fighters came from in that forgotten suburb. The henchman in the white mask connects a well-placed right hook, knocking down yet another bodyguard in a suit. Another violent onslaught is delivered with surgical speed, creating a devastating impact on the jaw. Suddenly, one of the masked attackers is also struck with brutal force, falling unconscious onto the pavement. The accomplice in the suit strikes back, delivering a crushing punch that instantly breaks the masked opponent's guard. The bodyguard shouts desperately to the driver, warning that they need to flee from there right away. Furious, the enemy boss rushes into the driver's seat upon noticing that the situation has indeed spiraled out of control. He shouts back, cursing heavily while starting the dark van's engine with a lot of haste and nervousness. The vehicle speeds away at high velocity, leaving the rest of the brawl behind in the middle of the dead-end alley. The driver rants with hatred, promising that he will personally take revenge on every member of that faction. Suddenly, a powerful black motorcycle appears, tearing through the city streets at high speed in the darkness. The rider performs a spectacular skid, sending sparks and friction off the pavement to block the road. The two-wheeled vehicle slides sideways, colliding directly into the front of the approaching black van. The driver widens his eyes in absolute panic, unable to understand what kind of madness just occurred. Crouched on the ground, the ally in the dark jacket tries to catch his breath after the dangerous collision. With a wicked smile and his eyes lit up, the young man wonders if that is indeed the location of the hideout. His dark and focused gaze makes it clear that he will not spare any of the enemies who appear in the area. At that, a crushing punch lands squarely on the jaw of one of the henchmen, who falls completely unconscious. The young protagonist continues running desperately, fearing he won't arrive in time to save his younger sister. He lands a violent flying kick against his rival while blaming himself heavily for the danger she is facing. The hero leaps down the concrete steps, knocking over another opponent, and remembers the promise he made to the young girl. His eyes show deep frustration for not being able to keep his word to maintain her safe there. At the same time, his partner's glowing gaze reveals an implacable determination to crush their adversaries. The young man in the dark jacket coldly mentions that the kidnappers simply ran into a lot of bad luck today. With heavy steps, the tattooed giant walks over to his partner, saying that an apology is unnecessary. The gray-haired young man maintains his unwavering focus, preparing to start yet another round of fighting. At that moment, the two partners spot a mysterious man in a suit standing under the light of a lamppost. With a sarcastic smile, the young man wonders if that mysterious fellow is indeed the leader of the rival gang. he fixes his murderous gaze, guaranteeing that none of those thugs will leave the district alive today. Inside the van, the driver slams his fists on the steering wheel with great force, letting out curses of pure rage and stress. Desperate, he grits his teeth, cursing that suburb and the madness he just witnessed on the road. But suddenly, the tied-up girl in the back seat stretches out and uses the ropes to choke the criminal. The driver widens his breathless eyes as he struggles, trying to break free from her desperate grip. The girl remembers her old training days, where she would watch her brother learn effective self-defense techniques. Back then, she would watch in absolute silence, storing every detail of those movements in her memory. The young protagonist used to struggle, while the large tattooed guy explained the theory behind that chokehold. She tightens the rope with even more determination, realizing that the technique really works in practice. She regrets not being able to react sooner, but pushes those thoughts aside and focuses all the strength into her arms. Almost out of air, the gangster tries to reach the girl, but his body is already weakening significantly in the struggle. Breaking free, the driver turns around with his eyes lit up and shouts furiously that he almost lost his life because of her, consumed by hatred. The man delivers a violent slap to the young girl's face, promising that he won't make things easy anymore. But suddenly, the vehicle's door is thrown open, and the partner in the dark jacket appears right behind the aggressor. With a swift movement, the alley grabs the driver by the shirt collar and pulls him out of the black van. The gangster is thrown backward onto the pavement, while the young man looks down at him with total contempt. Wheezing, the fallen man massages his neck, trying to catch his breath after suffering the brutal fall. He widens his terrified pupils as he realizes who was responsible for cutting off his escape route right there. The young man in the dark jacket scoffs, saying that in the end, the kidnappers were just weak worms. Furious, the thug throws a right hook at the young man's face, who takes the impact without showing any reaction. The aggressor steps back in surprise at that absurd resistance, while the hero glares at him with total indifference. With a crazed smile, the criminal tries to maintain his tough guy act, mocking that his opponent got way too excited. But before he can do anything, the young man moves quickly with agile steps in the darkness. With surgical speed, the hero grabs the villain's face with full force, blocking any attempt at a punch. Fixing his icy glare, the young man states that he indeed would never have worked for a coward like him before. The scene changes, showing the former bearded boss and his assistant in a white dress shirt having a conversation. The partner in the suit argues that they need to make difficult decisions to maintain the group's safety. The bearded man rejects the plan, claiming that they should absolutely never use children to make easy money. Annoyed, the assistant shouts, asking how they are going to answer to the leaders of the massive faction. The hero in the dark jacket lands a very violent straight punch that instantly breaks the rival gangster's nose. He connects another brutal sequence of strikes to the stomach, declaring that the guy is not fit to be a boss. The villain spits fluid and grimaces in pure agony, realizing that he was indeed completely defeated right there. Without giving his opponent time to recover, the gray-haired young man lands another precise punch to the face. The crushing impact throws the man backward, his eyes widening as he feels the full strength of the young fighter. Lying on the wet pavement, the driver cries in pure terror, realizing that he indeed messed with the wrong people. The hero delivers the final blow right to his adversary's mouth, knocking the villain out once and for all. With a crushing punch, the young man forcefully strikes the rival driver's jaw, sending him flying backward. Victorious, the hero stares down at the fallen opponent on the ground, warning him that he will soon find where he belongs. At that moment, the fighter grabs the hem of the defeated criminal's pants and begins to drag him down the street. Under the yellow light of the lamppost, the young man approaches while his partner finishes tying up the rival. With that, the defeated henchman is left unconscious on the pavement, without any chance of reacting there. Meanwhile, the bearded boss gazes at the city skyline alongside the young girl, who remains thoughtful. In a serious tone, The veteran warns the girl that she must also go to the warehouse to ensure her safety. The young girl then simply lowers her head and replies timidly, accepting the experienced man's order. He praises her decision, commenting that living in debt and aimlessly like her brother is a terrible life. At that, the girl stops in her tracks halfway, there while letting out a sigh loaded with anguish. But with a sad look, she hesitates for a moment and tries to reason about her brother's situation. Suddenly, the subordinate in the suit shouts desperately, saying they received clear orders to retreat. At that moment, a strange guy inside the tractor scratches his head and starts talking to the crew. He speaks very seriously to the bearded boss, telling him they ordered everyone to clear out of that place. Because of that, the older bearded man opens his eyes in total shock and wonders who that crazy guy is. Then, the new guy with more than 11 years on the road gets out of the car, laughing in the older man's face. He says he was the assistant for the 3rd demolition crew, while flashing a very fake smile, walking casually with his hands in his pockets. The guy with glasses mentions he is still in the same position. But the real talk is that the big boss's orders are for everyone to get out of this area right away. With that, he throws a piece of paper at the bearded man's chest, warning him that for now, it is just a friendly heads up. He gives a mocking smile and comments that their target is actually a very tough nut to crack. Right after that, the guy raises his closed fist, announcing that it was a gift for the gang. He gets a serious look on his face, and the gray-haired youth tells the guy to show some respect. Angered, the guy with glasses squeezes the youth's head very hard, demanding respect for his former master. At that moment, the bearded boss grabs the guy's arm and tells him to stop that nonsense. He mocks him, saying the bearded man has not changed at all, and challenges the guy to settle the score in a fight. Crumpling the paper tightly, he asks if the two of them can really handle the heat. At that, the bully with glasses grinds his teeth in anger, feeling the tension get way too heavy. Squeezing his hands tightly, the guy thinks to himself that he will only tolerate that attitude for 1 month, but his eyes glow in the pitch black while he keeps repeating that the deadline is 1 month. Out of nowhere, he purposely bumps into the gray-haired youth's shoulder, saying he wants no excuses. Very angry about that reception, the bully walks away swearing and talking a bunch of nonsense. He gets a cold look, and the gray-haired youth just watches the guy leave without showing any fear at all. Speaking very calmly, the young man tells the boss he is going to pass the new details along to the rest of the crew. So the bearded boss just nods his head, deeply worried about the future. At that, the girl who was taken looks at everything in total shock, not understanding anything that is about to happen. Meanwhile, the tractor's giant claw remains stuck, breaking through the entire concrete wall. Hanging upside down, an enemy tries to yell, but the green tape on his mouth keeps any sound from coming out. Sitting in a chair, the older boss thinks that the rival group decided to move very fast this time. He looks at the warning paper on the table and thinks this strange movement is no coincidence. At that, the gray-haired boy comments that you cannot trust any paper from that crew. His eyes start glowing red, and the youth asks to handle this issue once and for all. But the bearded leader tells him to hold his horses, because it is still too early to act in that area. Left with no choice, the younger partner accepts what the boss said and nods in agreement. Sitting in the chair, the hero's younger sister lets out a long sigh to try and calm herself down. The young man asks if she is okay, and the girl responds a bit tensely that everything will get better soon. Then she says this whole mess seems to have way more secrets than she imagined before. At that, the gray-haired guy turns around and says this situation might actually work out in their favor. Calmer after the answer, the girl asks if she can clarify something about what she just saw. With that, he explains that the guy in the tractor used to be his master in a fighting group in the past. At this moment, the scene shows the youth's high school days, when he was quite a troublemaker in the neighborhood. In a dark alley, the student looked at several bullies lying on the ground after a fight. Out of nowhere, the guy with glasses approached him, smiling and praising how strong the kid was. Then the older man gave a card to the boy, inviting the kid to work with the crew. On the little white paper, it listed the position of assistant for the demolition crew along with a phone number. He explained that the cleanup crew's main job was to use brute force to settle things. He got a wicked look and said they shook to just take down anyone who stood in their way. At that, the scene shows a giant iron sledgehammer slamming against the ground and throwing sparks. Holding the wooden handle with his gloves, the young man was already preparing to face new dangers, while the master swung the heavy sledgehammer. The youth delivered a flying kick to push the enemy back. He landed a very powerful straight punch, and the gray-haired boy took down another rival in a suit, and the guy with glasses delivered a devastating blow with the sledgehammer. Wearing a wild expression, he says it is very difficult to explain serious adult talk to an innocent child. At that, the girl understands that these are dangerous adult matters and lowers her head, looking very thoughtful. Out of nowhere, the main character comes running into the room with his giant, tattooed partner. When she sees her beloved brother, the girl immediately runs toward the young man, crying with emotion. Then the two hug each other tightly in the middle of the hall, easing the tense atmosphere from earlier. Watching the two of them hug, the bearded boss scratches his head next to the gray-haired youth. At that moment, he becomes very thoughtful, knowing that things are going to get much worse very soon. Right after, the blue giant apologizes for being late and asks if any other trouble went down there. The strong guy says he has an urgent notice, but asks about the giant tractor stuck in the wall. Getting straight to the point, the bearded boss announces that the bosses ordered the team to leave the entire area. That the partner gets a bit confused as to why they would send someone from the demolition crew right away. The older man explains that the enemy suspects them because they are very close with the other rival boss. Walking slowly, the gray-haired youth asks to excuse himself to join in on that serious conversation. He points to the henchman hanging upside down, asks what they are going to do with the prisoner. At that, the tied-up enemy opens his eyes in despair upon realizing the youth saw that he is already awake. The bearded boss just replies completely emotionless that they need to get rid of the guy without any mercy. He gives a scary smile, and the youth fully agrees with his boss's harsh decision. Without wasting any time, he rips the green tape off the thug's mouth with a lot of anger and force. Utterly desperate, the prisoner cries, begging for his life and swearing he is just an ordinary employee. Crouching down, the gray-haired youth mocks the coward, telling him to keep up that tough attitude he had before. He keeps making fun of the threats the guy made earlier, saying he does not see a bully now. Humiliated, the thug starts barking like a dog in total desperation to save himself. While barking, the guy guarantees he has valuable gossip and that he can indeed help the group a lot. At that, the gray-haired youth makes a bored face, feeling secondary embarrassment from that scene. He mentions that this is a bad example for the girl and very harshly tells the guy to shut his mouth right now. Then the youth sticks the green tape back onto the thug's mouth, cutting off his desperate cries. Letting out a long sigh of exhaustion, the gray-haired hero complains that the guy is completely crazy. He says he has already figured out the enemy's side and prepares to settle this matter once and for all. But out of nowhere, the main character grabs his friend's arm, asking him to wait just a moment. With that, the boy unties the ropes, making the thug fall straight onto the concrete floor of that room. Very quickly, the hero grabs the injured guy by the shirt collar with a lot of anger and in an aggressive manner. He gets a terrifying look. The protective brother wants to know what the enemy has to tell them. He tells the thug to think very carefully before answering if he truly wants to keep living, showing his glowing red eyes. The boy warns that he wants a very useful answer from him right away.